averages in NBA history, Iverson has the third highest assist per game average at 6.2 per game, which trails only LeBron James and Jerry West. There's definitely a debate to be had on whether Iverson is a point guard or a shooting guard, but based on his fit within this roster, I'm placing him at the 1. Starting as shooting guard alongside of Iverson is the 6'3" shooter Hersey Hawkins. At his peak, he was averaging about 22 points in Philadelphia and was an All-Star in 1991. There's certainly more talented players that you could put in the number 2 spot, but something that's rather interesting about the 76ers franchise is that they don't have many all-time great three-point shooters within their history, and this starting lineup will desperately need a perimeter shooter who can space the floor for the rest of the starting 5. Hawkins certainly fits that mold, as he hit 40.6% of his three-point attempts in his days in Philly. The player starting at small forward is one of the easiest choices of the entire list, and it's the man known as the Doctor, Julius Erving. This 6'7" wing was simply one of the greatest above-the-rim finishers of all time. Much of his prime years were in the ABA, but even as a 76er, Dr. J was a league MVP and an NBA champion. Honestly, not much elaborating should be necessary for this selection. Starting at power forward is the round mound of rebound, Charles Barkley. I understand he got his lone MVP in 1993 with the Phoenix Suns, but if you ask me, the best and most dominant version of Charles was actually in Philly, as he was at his peak athletically and was a terrifying combination of speed and power. He was a monstrous scorer who was always among the league leaders in rebounds while shooting consistently around 60% from the field. Now, picking the starting center is actually a little tough, as it's easily the most stacked position within the 76ers organization. But for me personally, I gotta go with the incredible Wilt Chamberlain, and specifically, I'm thinking of the 1967 and 1968 version that was nearly leading the league in scoring, assists, rebounds, and efficiency all at the same time. This unselfish and more selective version of Chamberlain would mesh together beautifully with this incredibly strong starting 5. So now let's look at the second unit. Coming off the bench at point guard would be the 6'1" Hall of Famer Maurice Cheeks. He's one of the more underappreciated stars of basketball history, as he was one of the greatest defensive players ever at his position, and he was also a solid floor general who had elite court vision. At the shooting guard spot for the second unit is the 6'2" Hall of Famer and the 10-time All-Star Hal Greer. For much of his career, he was the underrated sidekick of Wilt Chamberlain, and was a solid two-way threat as he could punish you with his solid scoring, or he could find the open man if the defense wasn't careful. The small forward for the second unit will be the 6'6" star Billy Cunningham. This man was so much better than most people realize, as he was an awesome combination of grace and hustle. In his prime, he was simultaneously a top scorer in the league while being an elite rebounder. And in 1970 specifically, he averaged 26 points per game while pulling down 13 boards per game. He was also a massive contributor for the 76ers championship team in 1967, and he'll fit in quite well with his team-oriented second unit. The power forward for the second unit is simply one of the greatest defensive players of all time, Bobby Jones. This 6'9" weapon was nicknamed the Secretary of Defense, and for good reason, as he made 11 all-defense teams in his 12-year professional career. He'll be right at home, providing energy and effort off the bench, as he won the Sixth Man of the Year award in 1983. He also had quality shot selection, as he was regularly among the league leaders in field goal percentage. The backup center is the 76ers' former MVP and Finals MVP, Moses Malone. In this second unit, he'll have tremendous chemistry with Mo Cheeks and Bobby Jones, as they were all teammates on the historically dominant 1983 76ers. Basically, every loose board will be his, as Moses was one of the greatest rebounders of all time, and more specifically, the greatest offensive rebounder of all time. If you need me to elaborate on why he's the guy to back up Wilt Chamberlain, then you should probably just watch my Moses Malone video to gain a greater appreciation of his game. So now that we've established the starters and the second unit, let's pick the 3 rotation pieces. First off, I'm taking Joel Embiid as the most obvious selection. I gotta admit, having Embiid as simply a rotation player kinda feels disgusting, but it would feel even worse to reduce Wilt Chamberlain or Moses Malone to that role, so it kinda is what it is. I will say, having a 30-point scorer like Embiid in a rotation spot certainly speaks to the depth and talent of this team. But in a playoff situation, there's no question that I'd rather have Moses and Chamberlain getting the majority of the minutes. For my second rotation spot, give me the 6'3" shooting guard Andrew Toney. This 2-time All-Star was a solid and efficient offensive weapon for the 1983 76ers. And with 4 other players from that team, Toney will be right at home on this roster. For the third rotation spot, and my final spot on this roster, give me the point guard James Harden. Sure, his prime seasons were certainly with the Houston Rockets, but even since, Harden is simply too good to leave off the roster, and whether he's needed as a scorer or a distributor, he can have a massive impact off the bench. So here is a final look at my 13-man roster that to me represents the ultimate Philadelphia 76ers team. They may not be the most stacked franchise within this series, but they're certainly in the argument. First off, the starting point guard for the Bucks is the legendary Oscar Robertson. By the time Oscar arrived in Milwaukee, he was 32 years old and was no longer at the peak of his basketball abilities. But with that being said, he was still tremendously impactful in a multitude of ways, effectively scoring, rebounding, and assisting his way to an All-Star selection. Alongside of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he won the NBA championship in his very first season as a Buck. Given his veteran experience and his sound decision-making, I'm very comfortable making him the starting floor general of this all-time Bucks squad. Starting at the shooting guard will be the 6'5" sniper Ray Allen. He was in his early to mid-20s during his days with the Bucks, and this version of Allen was actually a solid combination of lethal perimeter shooting and a fantastic slasher, who would often finish plays well above the rim. Many people forget or simply never knew that the younger version of Allen was a superstar in his own right, who had the handles to take players off the dribble and had the athleticism to be a dominant scorer even inside of the painted area. Oscar will absolutely love finding Allen at the 3-point line or as a slashing scorer. Starting as small forward is the perennial all-star Marcus Johnson. This 6'7" wing was an elite scorer and rebounder during his prime, averaging as high as 25 points and 10 rebounds in his first 2 seasons in the league. For a scoring small forward, he was one of the most efficient players of all time, hitting 51.8% of his shots throughout the totality of his career. And in 1979, when he averaged 25.6, he was hitting a remarkable 55% of his field goal attempts. Very few non-centers in league history have averaged that many points on that level of efficiency. Without question, his bread and butter was his mid-range jumper, but he was also fantastic at finishing at the rim through the contact. He would certainly be a major contributor for this starting unit. Starting at power forward is none other than the Greek freak, Giannis. You guys know all about this guy. A 7-foot athletic specimen who is one of the most intimidating two-way players of all time. He has 2 MVPs, he's a former Defensive Player of the Year, an NBA champion, and a dominant Finals MVP. For this group, Giannis will be providing plenty of facilitating, scoring, rebounding, and rim protection. He's not an elite perimeter shooter, but he'll certainly enjoy kicking the ball out to his other elite perimeter shooting teammates. On this roster, Giannis won't be leaned upon as heavily as he's used to, but I don't think it's something that would cause him any frustration. Starting at the center position is arguably the greatest center in basketball history, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Sure, he was most famous for his days with the Los Angeles Lakers, but without question, he was the most dominant during his time in Milwaukee, especially on the offensive end of the court. Obviously, this 7'2" MVP was one of the greatest centers of all time, as he was equipped with arguably the most unstoppable signature move ever, the skyhook shot. He was also a tremendous rim protector and had underappreciated quickness. At his individual best in 1972, he averaged nearly 35 points, over 16 rebounds, and nearly 5 assists, while being one of the most efficient players in the entire league. As a championship winner alongside of the great Oscar Robertson, he'll have an extra bit of chemistry with the starting point guard of the squad. Moving on to the second unit, the backup point guard will be the all-time great perimeter defender, Sidney Moncrief. Now Moncrief may be seen to some as a 2-guard rather than a 1, but he does have experience playing both positions well, and based on the roster needs of this unit, he'll be a better fit at point guard. Only one guard in NBA history has won the Defensive Player of the Year multiple times, and that is the 6'4" Moncrief. With that being said, you would be a fool to think that he could only play defense. On offense, he was a solid facilitator and a pretty reliable scorer, usually getting around 20 points per game on over 50% shooting. If Oscar or Allen are ever struggling with their defensive assignment in the starting unit, then Moncrief will be an impeccable substitution. The backup shooting guard will be the 6'6" shooter Michael Redd. Throughout the 2000s, Redd was one of the most lethal volume 3-point shooters in the entire league. Yet for some reason, he seems to have been widely forgotten by the basketball community. I certainly haven't forgot his abilities though, as you had to stay close to this man on the perimeter at all times. Otherwise, he would make you pay for it. He was never considered elite in any area other than as a scorer, but at his best in 2007, he was scoring 26.7 points per game while finishing in the top 10 in the league for 3-pointers attempted per game. Similar to Ray Allen's impact in the starting unit, Michael Redd will be the primary floor spacer for the second unit, as he'll do a fantastic job of keeping the defense honest. The backup small forward will be the 6'7" champion, Chris Middleton. This modern star has had a significant impact on the Bucks in recent years, and on this all-time squad, he'll be chipping in as well. Middleton gives this roster another valuable 3-point shooter and championship experience. Obviously, as a longtime teammate of Giannis, there will be some chemistry when those two players happen to find themselves on the floor together. The power forward for the second unit will be the 6'9" Terry Cummings. This former All-Star was a consistent double-double player, who was actually the team's leading scorer when they eliminated Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in the 1985 playoffs, while averaging nearly 30 points per game over the series. During his era, he had elite ball handling and footwork that was extremely rare for a power forward. His jump shot was also extremely difficult to defend due to his pull-up jumper with an extremely high release point. He'll certainly be an offensive spark for his team off the bench. The backup center behind Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the 6'11" beast Vin Baker. Almost all of his All-Star appearances were made in his days in Milwaukee, and he was a consistent threat in the post as he was a fundamental player with solid footwork, which enabled him to get plenty of points in and around the paint. At his peak, he was averaging around 20 points and 10 rebounds, leading the Bucks in both categories. Now to finish up the roster with 3 rotation players. First off is the 6'6" small forward Bobby Dandridge. This two-way star won an NBA championship with the Bucks and with the Bullets. He was typically dropping around 20 points per game and 7 rebounds a game, while being a terrorizing perimeter player with his elite smothering defense. The second rotation player is the 2-time 6th Man of the Year, Ricky Pierce. This 6'4" shooting guard was a certified bucket, who was a tremendous scorer for his team. For example, in the 1989-1990 season, Pierce led his Bucks in scoring, averaging 23 points per game on 51% shooting, regardless of the fact that he didn't even start a single game that year, making him one of the few players in NBA history to lead his team in scoring as the 6th man. That efficient average of 23 points per game came in only 29 minutes per game. If this team ever found itself needing a solid offensive spark, then you can bet that Ricky would be coming off the bench gunning it. The last rotation spot goes to the big dog, Glenn Robinson. He was a 6'7" small forward who did a little bit of everything. Throughout his career, he averaged 20 points per game and was also chipping in as a quality rebounder. Defensively, he also had quick hands, as he was often leading the team in steals per game. At this point, I'm pretty convinced that this roster would have absolutely no issues scoring the basketball. But if so, Robinson would be yet another solid offensive spark off the bench. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Bucks team. This team is packed with amazing scorers, and many of them shot above 50% from the field. With elite shooters, the spacing would be pretty solid on this all-time squad. And beyond that, there is a multitude of elite and stifling defenders, ready to make life hell for the opposing team. Here is my list of honorable mentions for the Bucks, should any of these players have made the roster instead. Starting at the point guard position is the sensational and explosive Derrick Rose. His peak may have been short-lived, but before the ACL tear, he was one of the best players in the entire league, as he was the youngest MVP winner in NBA history, securing the award at just the age of 22. Not only was he one of the fastest players in the game, but his ability to finish around the rim was absolutely lethal, as he had a dangerous layup package and amazing mid-air body control, reminiscent of another former great out of Chicago. In his heyday, he was the floor general of a strong and defensively minded Bulls team, and on the Ultimate Squad, it will be more of the same, except just a million times better. Starting at the shooting guard position is a guy who was pretty decent at basketball, Michael Jordan. What do I have to say that you guys don't already know? MJ is arguably the greatest two-way player in basketball history, as he has 10 scoring titles and 9 first-team all-defensive selections. Basically, all the post scoring will be covered thanks to this 6'6" guard. And with Jordan's clutch gene providing his playoff scoring average of 33 points per game, he'll certainly make Chicago a force to be reckoned with, regardless of who they're matched up against. At the starting small forward is the 6'7" slasher Scottie Pippen. Right next to Jordan, Pippen will make the perimeter defense an absolute nightmare for opposing guards. But beyond that, Pippen will help the Bulls execute in transition. And between Rose, Jordan, and Scottie, they'll have one of the most terrifying fast break trios of all time. I wouldn't necessarily describe Derrick Rose as a pure point guard, so when it comes to facilitating, Scottie's contributions will be very appreciated as basically a point forward. Starting at power forward for this Chicago group is the man they call the Worm, Dennis Rodman. As if this team wasn't already stacked enough on the defensive end, Rodman provides yet another player who can claim to be an all-time great defender. Even against some of the other Ultimate franchise teams, the Bulls will still likely be winning the Battle of the Boards, as Dennis was the best rebounder throughout the 1990s, nearly getting as high as 20 rebounds per game over the course of multiple seasons. He won't be providing much offense, but with the wings on this roster, it's not like it's even necessary for their success. Now finally, we move away from the 96 Bulls, and starting at the center position will be the underrated center of the 1970s, Artis Gilmore. This 7'2" monster in the paint joined the Bulls in 1976 at the age of 27, and at his best, he was averaging about 23 points per game and 13 rebounds a game. Along with that, he was also a fierce rim protector, which is something the Bulls never had during their dynasty days of the 1990s. Obviously, he will be a massive upgrade from Luke Longley, which I'm sure Jordan and Pippen will appreciate. Now onto the second unit. The backup point guard will be the 6'3" sharpshooter Steve Kerr. Although the Bulls bolster a ridiculously powerful starting five, you may have noticed that one of the major things the roster was lacking so far is three-point shooting, and Kerr is simply one of the most efficient three-point shooters in the history of the game. At his best in 1995 and 1996, he shot over 50% from three-point distance in back-to-back seasons. With his remarkable ability to catch and shoot with extreme lethality, he will operate as a great floor spacer for a team packed with many dynamic wing slashers. The backup point guard will be the 6'7" wing Jimmy Butler. Although he's become most famous in his years since, many people often forget that the highest scoring season of Butler's career was actually in his youth in Chicago. In 2017, he actually averaged 24, 6, and 5 while hitting nearly 37% of his three-point attempts, which will be pivotal to this team. Jimmy Butler being the substitution for Michael Jordan basically means that opposing defenses will never be able to relax at any point of the game. The backup small forward is the 6'5" scorer DeMar DeRozan. He's only been with the Bulls for the last couple of seasons, but in that time, he's been an elite weapon offensively, averaging a career-high 27.9 points per game in 2022. If for some reason Scottie is struggling offensively, DeRozan will be a massive charge to the offense off the bench. The backup power forward will be the 6'8" star from the 1970s, Bob Love. Bob is one of the great forgotten two-way players of NBA history, as he made 3 all-defense teams and was an elite scoring 4, getting as high as 25.8 points per game in 1972. He was a solid rebounder, meaning that he'll be a great substitution for Rodman as the Bulls continue to dominate on the boards. The backup center for the Bulls will be the 6'11" All-Star Joakim Noah. This guy was a consistent double-double player in his days alongside of Derrick Rose. Noah was also a frustrating presence in the paint defensively, and over the course of his career, he secured 3 all-defense team selections, including the 2014 season where he won the Defensive Player of the Year. Between Rodman, Gilmore, Bob Love, and Noah, there will never be a safe time for opposing teams to enter the painted area. And now for the 3 rotation players for this squad. The first of these 3 players is the 6'10" small forward Toni Kukoc. This talented wing will provide the Bulls with much needed perimeter shooting, and as a solid ball handler, he's very capable of making plays for himself or for others. Add in the fact that he's one of the best clutch shot makers on the entire team, and he might even see some minutes in crunch time. The second rotation player is the 6'10" power forward Horace Grant. He was a consistent double-double during his prime, and was the Bulls' 3rd scoring option after Jordan and Pippen. He will provide low-post stability for the team, both offensively and with the loose balls. The 3rd rotation spot, and the final spot on this roster, goes to the 6'3" shooting guard Ben Gordon. This guy was an absolute bucket in his prime, consistently averaging around 20 points per game. He was an elite 3-point shooter who made 40% of his attempts over the course of his career. He would usually take his game to another level in the postseason, which will be an added bonus to this team of postseason regulars. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Bulls team. Obviously, you have some of the greatest players of all time on this roster, but I gotta admit, the one major scary theme about this squad seems to be their suffocating defense, as both units provide some intimidating two-way threats. Here is my list of honorable mentions for the Bulls. To be honest, picking the final 3 roster spots for this group was extremely tough, considering the quality of ballers who are still left on the board. Starting at the point guard position is the 6-foot 4-time All-Star Mark Price. In the late 80s and early 90s, this guy was so ahead of his time, as he was a very efficient dual threat in terms of his scoring and facilitating. During his prime, he was among the league leaders in assists per game, getting as high as 10.4 in 1991. The part I personally remember him for the most is his elite shooting all over the court. Several players get praised for having single seasons of 50-40-90 percentages, but then there's Mark Price, who was just a few ticks short of 50-40-90 splits for his entire 12-year career. With his incredible handle and with his remarkable pull-up 3-point jumper, he was really similar to Steph Curry stylistically and in terms of his skills. I'm very confident that he should be the floor general of this Ultimate Cavs group. Starting at shooting guard is the elite 6'2" scorer Kyrie Irving. I understand that technically Kyrie is usually recognized as a 1 instead of a 2. But the thing is, Kyrie has spent some time in his career at the shooting guard position, and Price and Irving are both so good in their own right that you kinda need them starting on the floor together. At the shooting guard spot, Kyrie will be able to focus on doing what he loves most, getting buckets. And with this backcourt, producing points will never be an issue for this starting unit. At small forward is the most obvious choice, maybe ever, LeBron James. The only thing that's up for debate with this pick is which version of LeBron to pick, the pre-Miami Heat version or the post-Miami version. Personally, I want the post version, who was better in the postseason and had a legendary playoff run in 2018. With the Kings scoring, rebounding, and playmaking, he'll be making this team a considerable force regardless of which other Ultimate teams they're up against. There's a couple great choices for the starting power forward, but personally, I'm going with Kevin Love. Love has pre-existing chemistry and experience with LeBron and Kyrie, so from an X's and O's standpoint, he'll be a seamless fit in this starting unit. I also wanted a starter who could be considered as a stretch 4 and give Mark Price another capable perimeter shooter for him to facilitate too. Obviously, Love's prime years were in Minnesota, but make no mistake, he was still tremendously impactful in his first couple seasons in Cleveland. And beyond shooting, his ability to clean up the boards will be greatly appreciated as well. Starting at center is the underrated and underappreciated 7-footer Brad Daugherty. For a while, Brad was the co-star of Mark Price, and the tandem had the Cavs looking like perennial dark horse contenders in the Eastern Conference. He made 5 All-Star teams in his time in Cleveland, and he was putting up monstrous double-doubles on a nightly basis, as he usually averaged an efficient 20 points and 10 rebounds during his peak years. In Cleveland, LeBron James has never played with a center as impressive as Daugherty, and he will certainly be thrilled with the opportunity to throw lob passes to an athletically elite big man down low. Now for the second unit. The backup point guard will be the NBA Hall of Famer Lenny Wilkens. He was one of the great left-handed players of history. He's known mostly for his earlier years outside of Cleveland, but even at the age of 35 when he joined the Cavs, he still remained a top-tier floor general in the league. In that first season with the team, he averaged about 20 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds on 45% shooting. With his solid ball handling, his elite court vision, and with his sound decision making, this second unit will certainly be in good hands. The backup shooting guard is the 6'6" champion Ron Harper. Although he's most famous for his championship days as a member of the Chicago Bulls starting 5, without question his best days individually came well before that. Even in just his rookie season with Cleveland, Harper was tearing up opposing defenses, averaging about 23 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists, while being among the league leaders in steals per game. In his youth, Harper was actually quite the athlete, as he would often finish high above the rim, dunking on some of the best rim protectors the league had to offer. The backup small forward is the former All-Star Mike Mitchell. In the early 1980s, this 6'7" wing was a master of the mid-range game, as he had excellent footwork and a lethal pull-up jumper. He wasn't the fastest or most explosive player, but he had a great understanding of the fundamentals and used it to be the leading scorer of his team. At his best in 1981, he averaged about 24.5 points and 6 rebounds on 48% shooting from the field. He'll be a tremendous spark off the bench for this group. The backup power forward is one of the most jaw-dropping athletes within the history of the franchise, Larry Nance. This 6'10" high flyer was actually the first dunk contest winner in the 1984 competition. But beyond the fact that he was a walking highlight, he was actually a pretty solid all-around player as well. In his days in Cleveland, he made 2 All-Star teams and was an NBA All-Defender. Thanks to his leaping ability and his high defensive IQ, his rim protection was remarkable, as he got as high as 3 blocks per game in 1992, while averaging about 17 points and 8 rebounds per game. Although he's technically backing up Kevin Love on this ultimate team, he's certainly good enough to steal the majority of the minutes. The backup center is the 7'3" Lithuanian Zydrunas Ilgauskas. When people say that LeBron played with absolute trash during his finals run in 2007, the player I'm most annoyed on behalf of is Zydrunas. The skilled and methodical big man was genuinely in the conversation of the top centers in the Eastern Conference for some time, as he made 2 All-Star teams in Cleveland. At his best, he was averaging 17 points and 8 rebounds, while being a reliable rim protector. Whenever Daugherty will need a break, Ilgauskas will be more than ready to pick up the slack. Now onto the 3 rotation players. The first of the 3 players is the underrated point guard Andre Miller. Miller spent the first 3 years of his career in Cleveland, but he didn't hesitate to have an immediate impact. His best season with the Cavs was in 2002, when he averaged about 16 points, 11 assists, and 5 rebounds on 45% shooting. That year, he actually led the entire league in assists per game, ahead of all-time great distributors like Jason Kidd, John Stockton, Gary Payton, and Steve Nash. With point guards ahead of him on this roster like Mark Price and Lenny Wilkens, it will be hard for Miller to get a tremendous amount of minutes, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see him being the best player on the court every once in a while. The second rotation player is the 6'4" shooting guard Austin Carr. During the 1970s, Carr was an absolute problem for opposing defenses, as he usually averaged around 20 points per game. He was an NBA All-Star in 1974, regardless of the fact that his Cavs had one of the worst records in the entire league. The third rotation player and the final player on this roster is the 6'9" power forward / center Cliff Robinson, not to be mixed up with the former Blazers All-Star Clifford Robinson. Cliff Robinson of the Cavs was a powerful beast down low, and at his best in 1983, he was averaging about 18 points and 11 rebounds on 48% shooting. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this ultimate Cavs team. I doubt anyone watching this video was expecting this roster to be competitive with the other ultimate teams in this series. But I'm not gonna lie, this team is sneaky good, especially when it comes to their incredible rotation of floor generals. Add in Kyrie, LeBron, and some other underrated contributors, and I could certainly envision this team being a tougher matchup than anyone expected. Here is my long list of honorable mentions for this franchise. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Starting at the point guard position is the 6'1" four-time All-Star Rajon Rondo. I think a lot of people forget just how good this guy was in his prime. That's partially because of this weird dynamic where he was way younger than the Celtics' Big Three, so as Pierce, Garnett, and Allen were all declining, Rondo was only getting better. For a few years, he was actually sneaking his way into the conversation of the best point guards in the league, as he led the NBA in assists per game on 3 separate occasions, getting as high as 11.7 in 2012. He was also an elite defensive player, who was regularly among the league leaders in steals per game, and he earned 4 All-Defense Team selections. Don't forget how he was one of the most clutch players in the entire league, regularly putting up jaw-dropping stat lines in the playoffs. With so many offensive weapons in this starting lineup, they'll all be eating well with a prime Rondo doing the orchestrating. Starting at shooting guard is the 6'5" legend John Havlicek. This former superstar is certainly worthy of a spot on this starting unit, as he was an 8-time NBA champion, a 13-time All-Star, and made 11 All-NBA teams. He was also the very definition of a two-way player, as he made 8 All-Defense teams while filling up the stat sheet on offense. Specifically, in 1971, he averaged 29 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists on 45% shooting from the field. Simply put, he had all-around offensive skills that were way ahead of his time, and Bill Russell often leaned upon Havlicek to carry the offense for the Celtics. He was also quite the clutch performer, and was even the Finals MVP in 1974. Rondo will certainly love feeding this legend the basketball on a frequent basis. Starting at the small forward spot is, of course, Larry Bird. What is there to say about this legend that you guys don't already know? Bird was excellent at just about everything on the court. He was the epitome of efficient, as he was regularly getting around 50-40-90 percentages. He was an elite scorer, he was an all-time great rebounder, he was one of the greatest passing forwards in NBA history, and he was an underrated defensive player, making 3 All-Defense teams, including 3rd place in the DPOY race in 1983. So far, every single player in this starting unit is basically the definition of clutch, which shouldn't be totally surprising considering how many championship banners they have. Starting at power forward is the man they called the torture chamber, Kevin McHale. You could certainly make an argument for a different starting power forward, but due to his chemistry with Bird, I thought he'd be perfect with this group. The 6'10" McHale probably had the greatest footwork for a big in league history by any player not named Hakeem Olajuwon. In the post with his back to the basket, he was nearly unstoppable, and he was ridiculously efficient, as he had the highest single-season scoring average in NBA history for any player who shot at least 60% from the field and 80% from the free throw line. Continuing the theme of this squad so far, he was a remarkable two-way player, as his rumored 8-foot-long wingspan made him an intimidating defensive force in the paint, and because of that, he actually earned 6 All-Defense Team selections in his time in Boston. Starting at the center position is the game's ultimate winner, Bill Russell. As if this team didn't have enough defense already, in comes Bill Russell, who led the league in defensive win shares in 10 out of his 13 seasons. Along with the fact that he was probably the greatest defensive player of all time, he was also a top 3 rebounder, who would regularly dominate the boards thanks to his tremendous strength, IQ, and his world-class leaping ability. He was also a solid passer and a remarkably unselfish team player, which will be fantastic for this ultimate squad, with plenty of talent and plenty of egos. I know this word is getting redundant, but Russell was about as clutch as it gets, as he won all 10 of the Game 7s he participated in, which is a major reason why he got his 11 championship trophies. Now let's move on to the second unit. The backup point guard is the man known as the Houdini of the hardwood, Bob Cousy. This legend from the 1950s and 60s was the mesmerizing floor general of his time. Even with the more restrictive dribbling rules of his era, he had a fantastic handle of the basketball and incredible court vision. He actually led the NBA in assists per game for a whopping 8 straight seasons, which is easily the most in NBA history. His one major flaw was actually a flaw of his era, and that was the fact that he had a terrible field goal percentage, as the general basketball player was learning proper mechanics of the jump shot, and sometimes they didn't even jump. Because of this, Cousy would not look to be a scorer in this second unit, but that won't be a concern as he'll have plenty of elite offensive weapons to facilitate too. The backup shooting guard is the Celtics scoring superstar Paul Pierce. When people think of Pierce at his absolute best, they usually think of his Finals MVP performance in the 2008 Finals. But the thing is, that was actually well after his individual prime, as the younger Pierce had much more speed and explosiveness. He got as high as 26.9 points per game in 2006, getting the majority of those points as a one-on-one nightmare for opposing defenders. The Truth will provide this second unit with some all-time great slashing and great three-point shooting, while being a solid go-to option in late-game situations. The backup small forward will be the modern 6'8" superstar Jason Tatum. For any reason, if the ultimate Celtics ever need a scoring spark off the bench, this man will be a lock to provide it, as he was a 30 points per game scorer in the 22-23 season. Alongside of Paul Pierce, second unit defenses will be completely overwhelmed by this perimeter attack. Tatum also gives Cousy another decent three-point shooter to facilitate too, which will be a tremendous help for spacing for this squad. The backup power forward is the one they call the big ticket, Kevin Garnett. This guy will be battling with Kevin McHale for the majority of the minutes at the 4 spot, and McHale will certainly have his hands full trying to keep his starting spot, as Garnett was the Defensive Player of the Year immediately in his first season with Boston. KG will provide a tremendous amount of energy, intensity, and leadership on the defensive end of the floor, but he'll also be making a tremendous impact on the boards. Although his prime days were certainly in Minnesota, there's no question that the Boston version of Garnett was still a massive difference maker. The backup center will be the 1973 MVP, Dave Cowens. This 6'9" beast was averaging around 20 points and 15 rebounds throughout his prime, as he did a solid job of taking the torch from Bill Russell as the anchor of the team down low. Now on this ultimate unit, he'll be doing more of the same, as he'll be taking over the center position in the rare instances where Bill Russell actually has to go to the bench. In total, Cowens was an 8-time All-Star with the Celtics, and he made 3 All-Defense teams, further bolstering this team's greatest strength. Now, onto the 3 rotation spots. And let me tell you, narrowing down these 3 final roster spots was incredibly difficult. The first rotation spot goes to one of the greatest shooters of all time, Ray Allen. I absolutely hated the fact that Allen wasn't a starter or in the official second unit. But if anything, that just speaks to the ridiculous depth of the wings for the ultimate Celtics. If there's ever a time where Boston is desperate for effective perimeter shooting, then Allen will come into the game absolutely gunning it. He'll always be an option whenever the team is looking for ways to open up the floor and create more scoring opportunities. The next rotation player is the 6'4" shooting guard Sam Jones. Imagine winning 10 championship rings as often the #1 scoring option on your squad, yet you're reduced to a rotation spot on the ultimate squad. That is the depth of this Celtics team. Jones was so far ahead of his time, as he had a smooth pull-up jumper and absolutely loved to run the pick and roll with Bill Russell. On several occasions, Jones would explode for 50-point games in the playoffs, which allowed the all-time great Bill Russell to focus all of his energy on defense and rebounding. On a team that has no shortage of defense, Jones will be a massive boost of offense off the bench. The last rotation spot goes to the 9-time All-Star Robert Parrish. This 7'1" star was a pivotal part of the Celtics dynasty in the 1980s. At his best in 1982, he was averaging nearly 20 points and 11 rebounds. And thanks to his consistent contributions, he was able to win 3 championship rings with the team. He's gonna have a hard time finding minutes with Bill Russell and Dave Cowens ahead of him. But with a few opportunities he'll get, the painted area will be in good hands. So here's a final look at the complete roster of the ultimate Celtics team. The defensive strength on this roster is utterly terrifying, and the IQ and experience on this team is insane as well, as they're loaded with winners and clutch performers. When it's all said and done, this may just be the greatest ultimate team of them all. But we'll have to finish this series before anything becomes official. Here is my long list of honorable mentions for this franchise. I gotta admit, it kinda makes me sick to my stomach that guys like Dennis Johnson and JoJo White had to be left off the roster. But seriously, who the hell was I supposed to replace? It's simply a near impossible roster to happily finalize. Starting at the point guard position is arguably the greatest point guard to never win a championship, Chris Paul. Although I believe his best days were in New Orleans, CP3 was still an absolute problem in his time in Los Angeles, and at his LA peak in 2014, he was simultaneously leading the league in assists and steals. He's one of the all-time great two-way point guards, as he had a ridiculously high offensive IQ while being a frustrating nuisance for opposing floor generals. Considering the incredible talent he'll be playing with on this ultimate squad, Paul will probably get a major bump in assists per game just off of the lob passes alone. Starting as shooting guard is the 6'8" wing, Paul George. Just like Chris Paul, PG-13 will be an impactful player on both ends of the court, as he is an athletically gifted scorer but also made 4 all-defense teams throughout his career. In his career with the Clippers, he's been shooting about 39% from three-point range, on nearly 8 attempts per game. Whether it will be his thunderous slams or his wide-open three-point attempts, he'll be a consistent recipient of Chris Paul's elite facilitating. Starting at small forward is the 2-time champion Kawhi Leonard. Getting him on the floor healthy may be difficult at times, but when he's out there, he's one of the premier superstar players within the league. Between CP3, Paul George, and Kawhi, the Ultimate Clippers will have one of the most intimidating perimeter defenses within this entire series. And then on offense, Kawhi will enjoy the less defensive attention, thanks to his starting supporting talent. At his Los Angeles best in 2020, he was averaging about 27 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists on 47% shooting. On top of that, he's been completely lethal from three-point range, hitting 40% of his three-point shots since he joined the Clippers. Starting at power forward is Chris Paul's favorite lob recipient, Blake Griffin. The 6'9" Griffin was an absolute beast in his early 20s with the Clippers, as he quickly established himself as one of the most explosive above-the-rim finishers in NBA history. As this roster is currently panning out, opposing rim protectors will never be safe. At Griffin's best in 2014, he averaged about 24 points and nearly 10 rebounds on 53% shooting. The pre-existing chemistry with Chris Paul will certainly work in his favor, and with the combination of Leonard and George drawing more attention, Griffin will have some of the most open lanes to the rim that he's ever seen. Starting at center is one of the 75 greatest players of all time, the 6'9" Bob McAdoo. Technically, he was a member of the Buffalo Braves before they became the Clippers. For a few years in the 1970s, he was actually rivaling Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for the title of the best player in the NBA. He was the league MVP in 1975, and he actually won 3 straight scoring titles from 1974 to 1976. At his individual best in 1975, he averaged over 34 points and 14 rebounds on 51% shooting, and he did this with his remarkable mid-range artistry. With his stellar footwork and with his smooth jump shot, McAdoo will be the leading offensive star for this all-time group. Now let's go to the second unit. The backup point guard is the veteran floor general Sam Cassell. Although Sam I Am was 36 years old at the time he joined the Clippers, he remained an elite player and was tremendously impactful for their playoff run in 2006. That season, he averaged 17 points, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds on 44% shooting. As a dual threat, and with his championship experience, he'll be a quality orchestrator for the second unit. With the tremendous weapons at his disposal, Cassell will have one of the most productive assists per game seasons he's ever experienced. The backup shooting guard is the 6'2" gunner World B. Free. This guy was extremely dangerous when he got hot, and at his peak in 1980, he averaged 30 points and 4 assists on 47% shooting. Coming off the bench, he'll be not just an offensive spark, but an offensive inferno, as he was a quick guard with a remarkable change of pace. From an efficiency standpoint, he was also pretty reliable as a three-point shooter, which will naturally create more floor space to operate for the second unit. He had the confidence in his jumper to pull up from just about anywhere on the court, and that will be a nice addition to this mostly defensively minded team. The backup small forward will be the man known as the human highlight film, Dominique Wilkins. He didn't spend a tremendous amount of time in Los Angeles after he was traded there, but in his short 25-game stint with the Clippers at the age of 34, he averaged a monstrous 29 points and 7 rebounds on 45% shooting. This was after his Achilles tear, but right alongside of the great Kevin Durant, he had one of the greatest comebacks from an Achilles injury that the league has ever seen. Despite his age and injury history, Wilkins still retained much of his explosiveness from his youth. And with great passers like Chris Paul and Sam Cassell on the roster, Dominique will be a dangerous threat in transition and when slashing to the basket. The backup power forward is the 6'9" beast Elton Brand. He didn't have the greatest longevity, as he only made 2 All-Star teams in his entire career, but at his best in the 05-06 season, Brand led his Clippers to an overachieving playoff run, as he averaged nearly 25 points, 10 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks on 52.7% shooting. He'll make a fantastic substitution for Blake Griffin, seeing how he has a different approach to the game and prefers to assert his dominance with less athleticism, but more strength and bullying in the paint. With that being said, he did have a really quick first step, and would often catch the defender off guard with his remarkable quickness. The backup center is the 6'11" monster DeAndre Jordan. He was never a great scorer, and he was a tremendous liability from the free throw line. But he was also one of the greatest lob threats in NBA history, and was also a dominating presence on the boards, as he led the league in rebounds per game twice, getting as high as 15 rebounds per game in 2015. He was also a solid rim protector who made 2 all-defense teams in Los Angeles. Bob McAdoo will certainly be the anchor of the offense at the center position. But if a more tenacious defensive presence is ever needed, then Jordan will be a stellar substitution. And now for the 3 rotation players for this franchise. The first is the 6'3" shooting guard Randy Smith. Throughout the 1970s, this guy always played with hustle and heart. He was incredibly fast, he had a solid handle of the basketball, and was absolutely relentless about attacking the rim. At his best in 1978, he averaged nearly 25 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds, and 2 steals on 46% shooting. He was also the All-Star Game MVP that season as well. The second rotation player is the 6'10" power forward Danny Manning. This two-time All-Star had a solid jump shot up to 20 feet out, and was one of those rare bigs of the 1990s who could actually stretch the floor on offense. He was a graceful player and a fundamentally sound scorer, who was great at running the floor and finishing with his solid athleticism. At his best in 1993, he was averaging about 23 points and 7 rebounds on 51% shooting. He tended to get in foul trouble quite a bit, but when he was out there, he was always incredibly impactful on offense. The third rotation player and the last player on the roster is the 6'6" combo guard Ron Harper. He was famous for being the starting point guard of the 1996 Chicago Bulls, but in his more youthful days in Los Angeles, he was a premier scorer and was consistently among the league leaders in steals per game. During that 4-year stretch, he averaged just short of 20 points per game while putting up 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2 steals. On this roster, he'll be yet another dangerous player who can finish above the rim with regularity. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Clippers team. I'm pretty sure no one expected this team to be among the best teams in this series. But honestly, considering their losing history and their somewhat shorter existence, I'm actually surprised they're as decent as they are. Their biggest issue appears to be their health concerns, as most of their starters have a history of missing many games. But assuming they're all available, then they're actually quite formidable. Here is my list of honorable mentions for this franchise, should any of these players have made the roster instead. Starting at the point guard position is the 6'3" highlight machine, Ja Morant. He's only 24 years old and is still establishing his legacy in the NBA, but regardless, he's easily the best point guard in the history of this franchise. With his tremendous scoring and solid facilitating, he'll be a dangerous two-way threat for this all-time squad. He'll set the tone for what will be a youthful team, and with him leading the way at the point, there should never be a time where they're lacking energy and effort. Starting as shooting guard is the 6'4" harasser, Tony Allen. Obviously, Allen was not an offensive specialist, as he only averaged 8 points in his career on 47% shooting from the field. But what he was is one of the greatest defensive players in NBA history. Statistically, he wasn't the type to get a ton of blocks or steals, but he was the type to smother the opposing star guards with his incredible on-ball defense. According to Kobe Bryant, Tony Allen was the toughest defender he's ever played against, and the numbers back up that statement, as the Mamba only shot 42% from the field and 28% from the three-point line when playing against Tony Allen. For his career, Allen made a total of 6 all-defense teams, which only a few guards have ever achieved. Starting at small forward is the 6'9" star Shareef Abdur-Rahim. This talented scorer was fantastic in the post with his back to the basket. Back in his days with Vancouver, he was usually averaging around 20 points and 8 rebounds, around 46% shooting. In an era packed with strong and during his years with the Grizzlies, he averaged about 19 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 blocks on 51% shooting. One thing this squad will have is a tremendous amount of size, and more often than not, the 7-foot pal will enjoy a mismatch in his favor at the power forward position. With his tremendous skills and with his reliable mid-range shooting, he'll be one of the key factors for the potential success of this group. Starting at center is the brother of Pau, Marc Gasol. This 6'11" big man was extremely similar to his starting brother, but although Pau was slightly more skilled offensively and had more moves in his bag, Marc was certainly the more formidable defensive player, and his rim protection will be vital to this team's chances. He was a 3-time All-Star during his time in Memphis, and he was the League's Defensive Player of the Year in 2013. Although he was second to Pau, Marc was still a very capable scorer in his own right, as he averaged as high as 19.5 points per game in 2017. This brother combo won't necessarily be punishing any defenders physically, but at the very least, the interior defense will have to be on alert at all times, with these two crafty Grizzlies doing work. Now let's move to the second unit. The backup point guard will be the 6'1" veteran Mike Conley. When he relieves Ja Morant off the bench, he'll certainly be a change of pace, as Conley relies less on his athleticism and more so on a solid offensive IQ and a sound decision making. He's a much slower, methodical player who will do an excellent job of leading the offense for the second unit. Back in 2017, he was averaging 20 points and 6 assists on 46% shooting, and an elite 40.8% from three-point range, which is key for this team considering the fact that they've been pretty lacking in the perimeter shooting up to this point. He's also a reliable defensive guard, as he made the NBA's All-Defense team in 2013. The backup shooting guard is the 6'8" sniper Mike Miller. I feel like this guy is better than most people remember. Miller was a part of the super team Miami Heat with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, but at that point, he was just a shell of what he once was. During his best years in Memphis, he won the Rookie of the Year and the Sixth Man of the Year in 2006. Simply put, he was one of the most dangerous shooters in the entire league, and specifically in the 06-07 season, he averaged 18 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists on 46% shooting. He also had the third highest average in the league for three-pointers attempted per game, while hitting a stellar 40.6% of his attempts. His ability to spread the floor will be a massive help to this roster, and it might even earn him some extra minutes with the starters. The backup small forward is the tremendously talented Rudy Gay. This 6'8" scorer had a fantastic handle on the basketball and was remarkable in isolation situations. He was tremendously athletic with an impressive vertical leap, and if you were not careful as a defender, he may just emphatically posterize you with a thunderous slam. With his ability to create good looks for himself, Rudy was a fantastic option in late game situations and hit quite a few clutch shots during his career. At his best in 2008, he averaged 20 points and 6 rebounds on 46% shooting from the field. If the starting unit ever needs a quick boost of offense, then Rudy will be a great substitution who will come out firing. The backup power forward is the 6'9", 250-pound beast, Zach Randolph. Honestly, it kinda pained me to leave this guy out of the starting unit. But with the Gasol brothers holding down the positions in the paint, he'll just have to be the best player off the bench. Zebo was a low-post machine who could use his strength to back down players at will, and had a tremendously soft touch with his mid-range jumpers. He was a two-time All-Star in Memphis, and at his best in 2011, he averaged 20 points and 12 rebounds on 50% shooting from the field. If a finesse approach isn't working for either of the Gasol brothers, then Randolph will be the appropriate substitution with a meaner approach. The backup center is the modern-day defensive dynamo Jaren Jackson Jr. He only recently turned 24 years old, yet he's already a Defensive Player of the Year winner, he's made 2 All-Defense teams, and he's led the league in blocks per game twice, getting as high as 3 in the 2022-2023 season. Considering his elite ability to protect the rim, he'll probably be eating well into the Gasol brothers' minutes. Especially when Marc Gasol and Jackson are out on the floor together, opposing teams are going to have a stressful time trying to score in the paint. Now for the 3 rotation players. The first is the 6'1" point guard Mike Bibby. In his time as Vancouver's floor general, Bibby was a reliable dual threat who could pull up and drain jumpers from anywhere on the court. At his best in 2001, he averaged 16 points and 8 assists on 45% shooting. With solid options ahead of him like Morant and Conley, there won't usually be many minutes available, but if he's ever needed, he'll be there, considering the fact that he never missed a game in his career as a Grizzly. The second rotation player is the 6'8" small forward Shane Battier. From the day this guy entered the league, he was always a solid 3-and-D player, as he made 2 All-Defense team appearances thanks to his relentless hustle and his tremendous length. He made 38% of his three-point attempts in Memphis, and he'll be relied upon for his three-point shooting with this group as well. The last rotation spot goes to the man known as Big Country, Bryant Reeves. This 7-foot, 275-pound center was an intimidating force in the late 1990s, as he used his size and power to occasionally oppose his will on smaller defensive players. At his best in the 96-97 season, he averaged 16 points and 8 rebounds on 49% shooting. Seeing how the best advantage for this Grizzlies team is their size, I thought I might as well lean into it with the addition of Reeves. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Grizzlies team. One thing to consider is how this franchise has only existed since 1995, which means they've had significantly less time to accumulate talent. Regardless, this is how they stack up. Let me know in the comments section how this Ultimate team would do in the Ultimate 30-team league. Also, here's my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Starting at the point guard position is the 6'1" perimeter shooter, Trae Young. Seeing how he's a modern day player who's still in his mid-20s, you're all familiar with this guy. Trae is usually among the top 10 players in the league in both points and assists per game. As a dual threat, he'll be perfectly suited to run the floor for this all-time talented group. Thanks to his perimeter shooting, he'll be creating plenty of space for his dynamic wing teammates to operate. Starting at the shooting guard spot is a man who was ahead of his time, Pistol Pete Maravich. This 6'5" sharpshooter loved to run the fast break, and with his remarkable highlight-worthy passes, he'll be helping Trae Young find all of the open players on the court. He had a remarkable handle of the basketball and had a lethal pull-up jumper even as far as three-point range. He made 2 All-Star teams with the Atlanta Hawks, and at his best in 1974, he averaged nearly 28 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, and 1.5 steals on roughly 46% shooting from the field. Starting at small forward is the one they call the human highlight film, Dominique Wilkins. He's most remembered for his insane dunks both in the actual games and in the NBA's dunk contests. But simply put, he was one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. He led the NBA in scoring in 1986, averaging about 30 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 steals on 47% shooting. He was a franchise superstar who would often go head-to-head in solo battles with the best players in the league, like Larry Bird and Michael Jordan, and oftentimes Dominique would come out on top with a better individual performance. With great passers in the starting unit like Trae Young and Pete Maravich, Dominique will be eating well, consistently putting up a highlight show at the rim. Starting at power forward is the 11-time All-Star Bob Pettit. Not only is he arguably the greatest player in franchise history, but Pettit is also one of the greatest power forwards of all time, as he won 2 league MVPs, 2 scoring titles, and an NBA championship, all as a St. Louis Hawk. This 6'9" star will do an excellent job of cleaning up the boards and providing additional low-post scoring. At his individual best in 1959, he averaged a league-leading 29 points, 16 rebounds, and 3 assists on 44% shooting from the field. It's also worth mentioning that he was an NBA All-Star in every single season of his career, so without question, he'll be providing both quality and consistency for this all-time group. Starting at center is the all-time great rim protector, Dikembe Mutombo. I figured that this starting unit was already overpowered enough with offensively minded players, so down low they'll have one of the greatest defensive players of all time, who built his entire legacy off of denying slashers at the rim. Not only did Mutombo win 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards in Atlanta, but he was also a league-leading rebounder. Specifically, in the 99-2000 season, he averaged 11 points, 14 rebounds, and over 3 blocks on 56% shooting from the field. With great playmakers on the squad, this 7'2" mountain will make a great recipient for all the lob passes coming his way. Now let's look at the second unit. The backup point guard will be the 9-time All-Star Lenny Wilkens. With Trae Young as the starter, the Hawks have a floor general who will often look to score for himself. But if a more traditional pure point guard is ever needed, then Lenny will be a fantastic substitution. He was solid at finding his open teammates, and when he chose to keep it for himself, he was a remarkable finisher around the rim. At his St. Louis best in 1968, he averaged about 20 points, 8 assists, and 5 rebounds on 44% shooting. The backup shooting guard is the NBA Hall of Famer Lou Hudson. Sweet Lou was 6 foot 5 inches tall, and he had a silky smooth jump shot that made him one of the best scorers in the league throughout the 1970s. In the instances where he and Pete Maravich share the floor together, they'll have a tremendous amount of chemistry as they functioned well as teammates in the 1970s. He made 6 All-Star teams, which were all with Atlanta, and at his best in 1973, he averaged 27 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists on 48% shooting. He'll certainly be a guaranteed surge of offense every time he comes in off the bench. The backup small forward is another guy who has no problems getting buckets, ISO Joe Johnson. This 6'7" wing has great fundamentals, and he specialized in creating shots for himself. Thanks to this quality, he was one of the most clutch go-to players in the league in the final few minutes. Honestly, even though he's coming off the bench, I expect Joe Johnson to be out on the court during the final few possessions of close games. He made 6 straight All-Star teams as a Hawk, and his peak year was the 06-07 season, where he averaged 25 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists on 47% shooting. The backup power forward is an underrated player from years past, Paul Millsap. This 6'7" force was an NBA All-Star 4 times, and all 4 of those times were as an Atlanta Hawk. He'll definitely be a change of pace whenever he comes in to replace Bob Pettit, as Millsap was fantastic in both pick and pop and pick and roll situations. He was a respected stretch 4, whose first season as a Hawk, he was an NBA All-Star and averaged 20 points and 12 rebounds on 49% shooting from the field. And he was second in the league overall in offensive rebounds per game, giving his team 4.8 second chance opportunities on a nightly basis. Now let's look at the 3 rotation players. The first is the franchise's all-time leader in steals, Mookie Blaylock. Simply put, he was one of the greatest defensive point guards ever, as he made 6 all-defense teams in his career. His nickname was simply the Thief, and for obvious reasons, as he led the league in steals twice, getting as high as 2.7 in 1997. If a nuisance is ever needed who could also score and facilitate, then this man will make a solid substitution. The second rotation player is the 6'4" small forward, Cliff Hagan. With the St. Louis Hawks, he was a 5-time All-Star and was a part of the 1958 championship team alongside of Bob Pettit. When he's on the court, he'll certainly be adding a more old-school style, as his go-to shot throughout his career was his reliable hook shot. At his best in 1960, he was averaging about 25 points, 11 rebounds, and 4 assists, while hitting over 46% of his shots, which was ridiculously high for a small forward during that era. The last rotation player is the 6'9" center, Al Horford. He's a quality player who made 4 All-Star teams in his time in Atlanta. He'll be a decent scoring option who can help rebound and spread the floor. With bigs ahead of him like Dikembe Mutombo and Moses Malone, there might not be a tremendous amount of minutes available, but in the few cases where he's called upon, he'll have an immediate impact off the bench. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Hawks team. Looking at this group as a whole, they're tremendously stacked on offense. But with that being said, they're not a very strong team defensively, with very few exceptions like Mutombo and Blaylock. Because of this, I picture this team trying to simply outscore opponents, with both teams well exceeding 120 points just about every night. Do you think this team will make the Ultimate Team playoffs when we eventually run the simulation on NBA 2K? Let me know below. Also, here is my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Now, in case you didn't know, the Charlotte Hornets and the New Orleans Pelicans have an extremely complicated history. The original Charlotte Hornets were established and first began playing basketball in the 1988-89 season. For nearly a decade and a half, the Hornets competed in Charlotte. But in 2002, the organization relocated to New Orleans due to low attendance in the initial location. For years, this franchise was known as the New Orleans Hornets, but they did spend a short period of time as the Oklahoma City Hornets due to the damage that was caused by Hurricane Katrina. After some time, they returned home and remained as the New Orleans Hornets. But in 2013, the team rebranded and became the New Orleans Pelicans, which is what this organization is to this very day. The entire left side of this column has this as their franchise history. Now in the right column, you have a new Charlotte expansion team that began playing basketball in 2004. This new, completely different organization was able to establish itself in Charlotte because of the void left by the Hornets after they relocated to New Orleans. Now here's where things get really interesting. After the New Orleans Hornets in the left column became the New Orleans Pelicans, the Hornets name and logo were now up for grabs. So in 2014, the Charlotte Bobcats rebranded and became the Charlotte Hornets. So as you can see in these two columns, these are two separate organizations with two different owners and with two different histories. Yet, at different points, each of these organizations were known as the Charlotte Hornets. Because of this, all-time great Hornets players like Alonzo Mourning, for example, will not actually be in this Hornets video, but rather in the Pelicans video, since that is the organization that was once that Hornets team. I know, it feels gross and it's super confusing, but to me, this is the best way to break down these ultimate teams based on the actual franchises they played for. In today's video, this column is the organization we're discussing. Starting at the point guard position is the 6'1" bucket getter, Kemba Walker. A lot of people forget just how skilled this guy was at his best, as he was a shifty guard with a lethal step-back jumper. During his prime, he was one of the most clutch shot makers in the entire league. At his apex in 2017, he averaged 23 points, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds on 44% shooting. He may not be one of the strongest point guards in this Ultimate Team series, but regardless, you'll have to respect his abilities as he can get extremely hot in a hurry. Starting at shooting guard is the solid combo guard, Terry Rozier. This 6'1" shooter will be a solid perimeter threat for this team, and will help keep the defenses honest as he spaces the floor with his respectable sniping. With Walker and Rozier as the starters, size will not be on their side. But as quick guards who can shoot from just about anywhere on the court, defenses will have to stay alert at all times. At his best in the 20-21 season, he put up averages of 20 points, 4 assists, and 4 rebounds on 45% shooting. Starting at small forward is the 6'7" high flyer, Gerald Wallace. During his career, this guy did a little bit of everything, and that's exactly what he'll be doing for this ultimate squad. He was a pretty capable scorer, but beyond that, he was also one of the best rebounding small forwards in the entire league. He was also an elite defensive player who made an NBA All-Defense team, was a steals champion, and was usually among the league leaders and blocks at his position. At his peak in 2010, he averaged 18 points, 10 rebounds, and 1.5 steals on 48% shooting. Starting at the power forward position is one of the top players in franchise history, Emeka Okafor. This former Rookie of the Year winner was a walking double-double during his athletic peak. As a 6'10" tower, he was usually starting at the center position. But with that being said, he did spend a significant amount of time at the 4 spot. And with his ultimate team specifically, I thought they'd work well with a twin tower approach. Starting at center is the capable big man, Al Jefferson. During his peak with the team, Jefferson was a 2010 guy on a nightly basis, who could use his size and strength to impose his will on opposing defenders. With Okafor by his side, these two will be cleaning up the paint and filling up the box score with the boards. Running the floor for the second unit will be the 6'7" point guard LaMelo Ball. Even at such a young age, he's already established himself enough to be the first man off the bench for this ultimate squad. As a dangerous dual threat, he'll be causing tons of havoc for opposing defenses the instant he enters the game. His best season came in 2022, and that year he averaged 20 points, 8 assists, and 7 rebounds on 43% shooting. The shooting guard for the second unit is the solid scorer Steven Jackson. This large 2-guard makes a solid substitution as he can get buckets in a hurry with his aggressive offensive mentality. He was also an above-average passer who will keep the ball movement flowing smoothly with the second unit. At his best with Charlotte in 2011, he put up numbers of 18 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists on 41% shooting. The small forward for the second unit is the former dunk contest champion, Jason Richardson. He's most famous for his time in Golden State, but during his days as a Bobcat, Jason was one of the top scorers on the team. Obviously, he was a fantastic slasher and a great finisher around the rim, but Richardson was also a solid spot-up shooter who could help space out the floor for the second unit. In the 2008 season, he put up numbers of 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists on 44% shooting and 41% from three-point range. The backup power forward is a more recent contributor, Miles Bridges. At this point in his career, he's still a young, developing player within the league. But with that being said, he's still a player who's ready to have an immediate impact whenever he comes off the bench to relieve Okafor, whether it be with his rebounding or with his reliable scoring. The backup center is the remarkably strong athlete Dwight Howard. Although he had lost significant steps since his prime days in Orlando, and although his tenure in Charlotte was short, Dwight still managed to have a significant impact that most teams would love to have on both ends of the court, as he was frequently putting up double-doubles as a Hornet, while doing his usual solid job of protecting the rim. Now on to the 3 rotation players. The first is the quality floor general Raymond Felton. With players ahead of him like Kemba Walker and LaMelo Ball, Felton might have a difficult time finding many minutes. But one thing about those other guards is that they typically tend to look to score for themselves, and a player like Felton could provide a more slowed down traditional approach if that's what's needed at any time during the game. The second rotation player is the proven veteran champion Boris Diaw. Although this 6'8" forward spent time with championship contenders like the Phoenix Suns and the San Antonio Spurs, his best production on an individual level actually came from his time as a Charlotte Bobcat. As a solid system player who's an above-average passer and can also knock down shots when he's open, he'll have a decent impact for this team off the bench. And now, the third rotation player and the last spot on the roster goes to the reliable small forward Gordon Hayward. His biggest issue in Charlotte is managing to stay healthy, but with plenty of time on the bench to heal and recuperate, he'll be able to come in and be a decent spark most of the time when he's called upon. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Hornets team. I gotta be real with you guys, this team sucks, and in my opinion is clearly the most lacking roster of this series so far. Usually, this is the part of the video where I try to find the silver lining and give a nice spin to the chances of this team, but I just can't do it this time, no matter how hard my brain tries. It's not totally their fault though, seeing that they're an organization that has only been around since the mid-2000s. But at the same time, this is the same franchise that once produced a team that only won 7 regular season games in a 66-game season. If you guys have more hopeful optimism about this team than I do, then let me know in the comment section below. Also, here is my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Starting at the point guard position is the 6-foot star Tim Hardaway. According to himself, he's got skills. Not everyone will get that reference, but what you need to know is that Hardaway was one of the meanest ball handlers of his era. He was a strong dual threat, as he was one of the best scoring point guards in the entire league, while also being an above-average facilitator. With some incredible wings by his side, Hardaway will be sure to provide plenty of alley-oop highlights. He made 2 All-Star teams in his time with the Heat, and at his Miami best in 1997, he averaged 20 points, 9 assists, and 2 steals on 53.2 true shooting percentage. Starting as shooting guard is arguably the greatest Heat player ever, Dwayne Wade. Flash was pretty much as good as it gets when it comes to being a slasher. In his prime, Wade was one of the greatest finishers around the rim, not just in his era, but in NBA history. Oftentimes, he doesn't get enough credit for his defensive play, as he made 3 All-Defense teams and is in the conversation for the title of the greatest shot-blocking guard in NBA history, right alongside of Michael Jordan. In 2009, Wade actually led the league in scoring as he averaged 30 points, 7 assists, 5 rebounds, and 2 steals on 49% shooting. With his 3 championships to go along with his tremendous experience, Wade will be one of the more consistent leaders on the squad. Starting as small forward is the NBA GOAT candidate LeBron James. In my opinion, this was James at his absolute peak, as his strength and athleticism were as good as ever, while his defense was among the very best in the league. Specifically, in LeBron's 2012 to 2013 season, he was elite in just about every category, as he averaged 27 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists on 56% from the field and 41% from three-point range, which was easily the best of his career. LeBron was a part of the Miami Heat squad that won 27 straight regular season games. But now, with a prime Dwayne Wade by his side, and with Tim Hardaway at the point instead of Mario Chalmers, there's no telling what this team is capable of. Starting at power forward is the 6'11 star Chris Bosh. Obviously, he's shown his ability to have flawless on-court chemistry with his fellow teammates Wade and LeBron, and as a consistent double-double threat, he'll be a valuable asset to this starting unit. Bosh's best was in the 2012 to 2011 season, where he put up around 19 points and 8 rebounds and 36 minutes of action per game. With so many fantastic superstars in this starting lineup, Bosh will have plenty of open opportunities for mid-range pull-ups, and he was a very solid option for that, as he was hitting 53% of his shots beyond 15 feet in the 2013 season. Starting as center is the man known as the Diesel, Shaquille O'Neal. Obviously, Shaq was at his very best in Los Angeles, but although he took a step back in Miami, I think many people forget just how good he still was as a member of the Heat. For example, Shaq was actually the league MVP runner-up behind Steve Nash in the 2004 to 2005 season, as Shaq averaged 23 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 blocks on 60% shooting from the field. With a stacked starting 5 such as this, the Diesel will be enjoying the most single-man coverage that he's ever experienced. It's also worth mentioning that Shaq is a remarkable outlet passer, and with fast break assassins like Wade and LeBron pushing the tempo, there will be plenty of highlight-worthy slams to finish off the transition plays. Now let's take a look at the second unit. The backup point guard is the 6'3 All-Star Goran Dragic. At his best, he was one of the more underrated floor generals within the league. He was also a very sound decision maker, as he averaged fewer than 3 turnovers per game in every single season of his career. In 2017, at the age of 30, Dragic put up averages of 20 points, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds, on 47% shooting from the field. He was also an elite 3-point shooter that season, as he was hitting 40.5% of his attempts, and that skill set will especially be valuable when he finds himself on the court with LeBron, who loves to find those open shooters. The backup shooting guard is the all-time great sniper Ray Allen. Not only is he a fantastic floor spacer, but he was one of the most clutch shooters of all time, which is a fact that Miami fans know quite well, as he hit the most important shot in the history of the franchise. He didn't join the Miami Heat until he was 37 years old, and in that first season with the team, he only averaged 10 points and 25 minutes of action per game. Regardless, when it comes to role players who can keep the defenses honest, there isn't really a better option than a lethal Ray Allen spotting up in the corner. The backup small forward will be the 6'7 star Jimmy Butler. Simply put, he's one of the all-time great playoff performers. He's also a dangerous two-way threat, as he's made 5 all-defense teams throughout his career and even led the NBA in steals per game in 2021. As talented as this all-time group is, there's no question that they will make the ultimate team playoff bracket. And with that being said, that's where Butler will shine the brightest, as he has a clutch gene that is rivaled by very few greats. The backup power forward is another defensive anchor, Bam Adebayo. Usually, he's starting for Miami at the center spot, but he is capable of playing the 4, and given who the centers are on this roster, the 4 spot will have to do. The best days of Bam's career may still be ahead of him, but as of now, he's a consistent 2010 guy who shot a tremendous 55% throughout his career in Miami. Occasionally, he'll also make a great substitution for Shaquille O'Neal in late game situations, seeing how Bam is actually a pretty decent free throw shooter, which will make the hack-a-Shaq strategy ineffective for opposing teams. The backup center is simply one of the greatest rim protectors of all time, Alonzo Mourning. Zoe was an intimidating two-way player who could score, rebound, and block shots with the best of them. He was a 5-time All-Star during his Miami years, and he actually led the league in blocks per game twice, getting as high as 3.9 in 1999. Alonzo was the league's Defensive Player of the Year twice, and his defense was a major help towards their NBA championship in 2006. Relieving Shaq off the bench is something he did quite often during those years, and in this case, he'll be doing more of the same, as Adebayo and Mourning are some pretty elite subs for the painted area. Now onto the 3 rotation players. The first is the sharpshooting small forward, Glenn Rice. This 6'8" All-Star was one of the best scorers of his era, especially from the perimeter. At his Miami best in 1995, Rice averaged 22 points and 5 rebounds on 47% shooting and 41% from three-point range. He's yet another perfect teammate to share the floor with LeBron, as Rice's preferred style is to spot up on the perimeter in catch-and-shoot situations. The second rotation player is the 6'10" small forward, Lamar Odom. He only played 1 full season in Miami, but it was a solid one as he participated in 80 regular season games and averaged 17 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists on 43% shooting. With his tremendous length and with his quality ball handling, Odom makes for quite the versatile substitution, who will certainly be a major spark off the bench whenever he's called upon. The last rotation spot and the final spot on this roster goes to the 7-foot center, Hassan Whiteside. His decline has been steep and quick in recent years, but some may already be forgetting just how impactful he was at his best. For example, in the 2016 to 2017 season, Whiteside averaged 17 points, a league-leading 14 rebounds, and 2 blocks, on 56% shooting from the field. Between Shaq, Bam Adebayo, Alonzo Mourning, and Hassan Whiteside, there will never be a time where opposing teams will have uncontested layups, as this is now likely the deepest shot-blocking squad in this Ultimate Team series so far. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Heat team. Not gonna lie, this roster looks absolutely terrifying on paper. Just imagine the 2013 Miami Heat, but instead of Mario Chalmers and Udonis Haslem alongside of the Big 3 Heat, it's instead an elite Tim Hardaway and an MVP candidate Shaquille O'Neal. Like I said before, the defense of this group is insane, not just on the interior, but on the perimeter as well. How many Ultimate teams in the East could beat this Miami Heat squad? Let me know below. Also, here's my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Starting at the point guard position is the league's all-time leader in both assists and steals, John Stockton. He may not be the most flashy point guard, but what you can't argue against is Stockton's sound decision-making, resulting in the Jazz making the playoffs every single season in his NBA career. Of the 6 highest assists per game seasons in NBA history, John Stockton has 5 of them. Especially in the 1989-90 season, he was a monster statistically, as he averaged 17 points, 14.5 assists, and nearly 3 steals, on remarkable efficiency splits. Beyond that, he was an elite defensive player, as he made 5 All-Defense teams and won 2 steals titles. Starting as shooting guard is the 1970s star who was way ahead of his time, Pistol Pete Maravich. This guy was a capable perimeter assassin who scored a large portion of his points from three-point distance before the three-point line even existed. With Stockton and Maravich in the starting lineup, the ball movement on this starting unit will be beautiful, as every open player will be found the instant they've created the space. At Pistol's best in 1977, he averaged a league-leading 31 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists on 43% shooting from the field. Starting as small forward is the fundamentally sound scorer Adrian Dantley. Although Dantley is probably most known for his time in Detroit, without question, the prime of his career was in Utah. He was a mid-range nightmare for opposing defenses, as he was incredibly crafty at getting to his spots. Over a 4-year stretch from 1981 to 1984, Dantley averaged north of 30 points per game, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists, while hitting an insane 56.4% of his shots, which is incredible efficiency for an elite center. But for a small forward who leads the league in scoring, that's completely unheard of. Starting at power forward is the mailman Karl Malone. For a while, he was the model of scoring consistency at the 4 spot. Not only was he one of the strongest players of league history, but he also had a smooth mid-range jump shot in his arsenal. The pick and roll between him and Stockton was the bread and butter of the Jazz in the 1990s, and it will continue to be a force on this ultimate team. Malone was also an underrated defensive player who made 4 all-defense teams in his career. He wasn't much of a shot blocker, but he was an absolute wall in the low post, refusing to give offensive players quality spots on the floor. Starting at the center position is the 7'4" monster Mark Eaton. Mark is quite possibly the most underappreciated defensive player of all time, as he was a terrorizing rim protector for the ages. In his career, he made 5 all-defense teams, he won 4 blocks titles, and was the Defensive Player of the Year twice. His peak was in the 1984 to 1985 season, where he averaged nearly 10 points, 11 rebounds, and an absolutely stupid 5.6 blocks, which is easily the highest single-season average in NBA history. If the best ability is availability, well then Mark had that too, as he only missed a total of 9 regular season games in his first 10 seasons. Now onto the second unit. The backup point guard is the former superstar Deron Williams. For a while, this guy was legitimately in the conversation for the title of the best point guard in the NBA. He was a dynamic scorer who had elite court vision, and that combination made him a dangerous dual threat that every defense had to respect. In 2010, he averaged roughly 19 points, 10 assists, and 4 rebounds, on 47% shooting from the field. The backup shooting guard is the young athlete Donovan Mitchell. This 6'3" guard will be a massive surge of offense off the bench, as he has a more aggressive tendency to look to score for himself. In 2022, he put up numbers of 26 points per game, 5 assists, and 4 rebounds, on 45% shooting from the field. The backup small forward is the 6'9" weapon Andrei Kirilenko. AK-47 was known for his remarkable on-ball defense, and with his fantastic length, he'll continue to frustrate opposing superstars when he subbed in to the contest. He was one of the greatest shot-blocking forwards of all time, as he led the entire league in 2005 with 3.3 per game. He made 3 all-defense teams in his career, and that quality will be extremely valuable to this all-time team that's mostly made up of offensively minded perimeter players. The backup power forward is the 6'9" all-star Carlos Boozer. After he turned 30 years old, his decline was sharp and quick, which I think has resulted in many people forgetting just how good he was in his prime. For example, in 2007, he averaged 21 points, about 12 rebounds, and 3 assists, on a stellar 56% shooting from the field. As the substitution for Malone, he'll ensure that defenses will never be able to relax in the low post. The backup center is the 6'11" all-defender Rudy Gobert. Simply put, he's been one of the greatest rim protectors of recent history, as he won the Defensive Player of the Year 3 times, and even led the league in blocks per game in 2017. He'll have an impact in more ways than that though, as he was also a league-leading rebounder in 2022, and will make a fantastic lob recipient for all of the great facilitators on the squad. Now onto the 3 rotation players. The first is the 6'4" shooting guard Jeff Hornacek. During their championship contending years in the 1990s, Hornacek was operating as the reliable third option. You could argue that there's some more talented players who deserve this rotation spot, but personally, I'm taking Hornacek for his elite 3-point shooting, as he'll spread the floor with his career 40% sniping from that distance. The second rotation spot goes to the 7-foot power forward, Lauri Markkanen. With traditional low-post power forwards like Karl Malone and Carlos Boozer, Markkanen will make a nice change of pace, as he has a more modern style that can help space the floor. The 2022-2023 season was his first as an All-Star, and that year he put up averages of roughly 26 points, 9 rebounds on 50% shooting from the field. The third rotation player and the final spot on the roster goes to the 6'7" small forward Gordon Hayward. At his best, Hayward did a little bit of everything for Utah, as he was a solid scorer from just about everywhere on the court. He was an NBA All-Star in 2017, and that season he averaged 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists on 47% shooting and 40% from 3-point range. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Jazz team. When you look at this group as a whole, they're pretty solid throughout, filled with great offensive and defensive players. One area that seemed to be lacking after the first 2 units was 3-point shooting, which is why I picked those last 3 rotation players to help out in that aspect. Do you think this team would make the ultimate playoffs in the West? Let me know your opinion. Also, here's my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Starting at the point guard position is the triple-double machine, Oscar Robertson. He wasn't a very flashy point guard, and with his slow and methodical approach to the offense, some have since described him as the Tim Duncan of the point guard position. He did a little bit of everything for his Royals, as he was an all-star in all 10 of his years with the team. Over that 10-season stretch, he averaged just a rebound and a half short of a monstrous triple-double. Considering how he averaged 42 minutes per game over the course of his career, the Big O will have this position on lock for this all-time Kings squad. Starting at the shooting guard position is the 6'3" modern star, De'Aaron Fox. I know, he plays the point guard position, and he always has been. But the thing is, this all-time Kings squad has way too many amazing point guards on the roster. So for me to keep all of them in the starting lineup or the second unit, I had to move one of them out of position. And in my opinion, Fox is the one who most naturally fits the 2-guard spot. He's one of the fastest players in the league, and he's already an elite scorer. But as the 2, he'll have an even greater green light to look to get buckets for himself. His first All-Star appearance came in the 2022-2023 season, as he averaged 25 points, 6 assists, and 4 rebounds, on 51% shooting from the field. Starting at small forward is one of the greatest shooters of the 2000s, Peja Stojakovic. At his peak, this guy was absolutely dangerous from the perimeter, and is a player who would absolutely love to play in the modern era of inflated 3-point shooting. He was an all-star with the Kings for 3 straight seasons, but his best individual year was the 03-04 season, where he averaged 24 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists, on 48% shooting from the field, 43% shooting from 3-point distance, and a league-leading 92.7% from the free throw line. Simply put, when this guy got hot, he was basically automatic from any distance. And with facilitators like Oscar Robertson giving him opportunities, he'll be capitalizing on plenty of good looks. Starting at power forward is the 6'10" Sacramento legend, Chris Webber. For a while, this guy was genuinely in the conversation for the title of the best power forward in the entire league. which truly says a lot when you consider the fact that he was competing against the likes of Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki. The ball movement will be beautiful on this starting unit, as Webber was an underrated ball handler and an underrated passer in his own right. At his individual peak in 2001, he was among the league leaders in scoring and rebounding, while being 5th among power forwards in assists per game. Starting at center is the one they call Boogie, DeMarcus Cousins. His decline was so quick and drastic that people have already forgotten his dominance in his mid-20s. For 4 straight seasons, he was an NBA All-Star, and at his Sacramento best in 2016, he was putting up stunning averages, filling up the stat sheet in basically every way. Continuing with the theme of this roster so far is his underrated passing ability as a big man, as Boogie was frequently among the league leaders in assists per game at his position. Now on to the second unit. The backup point guard is the 6'1" Hall of Famer Nate "Tiny" Archibald. Despite his undersized frame, this guy was an absolute weapon in the 1970s, who would consistently torch opposing teams in a variety of ways. For evidence of that, look no further than his 1972-73 season, where he led the NBA in points and assists in the same season. That year, he averaged 34 points, 11 assists, and 3 rebounds on 49% shooting. Again, this is the first guy coming off the bench, which should tell you the kind of nightmare that perimeter defenses will be dealing with whenever they have to face this Kings group. The backup shooting guard is arguably the most underappreciated player of the 1990s, Mitch Richmond. He was a 6-time All-Star, and all 6 of those seasons were in Sacramento. He was a fantastic all-around scorer who doesn't get the shine he deserves simply because his team didn't get any deep postseason runs, which had more to do with his lacking supporting cast rather than his individual abilities. At his best in 1997, he was averaging about 26 points, 4 rebounds, and 4 assists on 54% shooting and a deadly 43% from three-point range. The backup small forward is the controversial star, formerly known as Ron Artest. He spent only 2 seasons of his career in Sacramento, but he made a massive impact both offensively and defensively while leading his team to the playoffs in 2006. At his Sacramento best in 2008, he put up roughly 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 steals on 43% shooting and a solid 38% shooting from three-point range. The backup power forward is one of the 75 greatest players of all time, Jerry Lucas. This 6'8" legend was a perennial all-star in his time as a Cincinnati Royal, and although Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell stole all of the attention for their dominant rebounding, Lucas was an all-time great rebounder in his own right. He had many great seasons, but specifically in 1965, he averaged 21 points and 20 rebounds, while being 3rd in the league in field goal percentage and 8th in the league in free throw percentage. His efficiency would be considered great by today's standards, but by the standards of the 1960s, it was absolutely incredible. That kind of reliability will be something that benefits this squad whenever he comes in off the bench. The backup center is the Kings All-Star, Domantas Sabonis. In the cases where Boogie decides to get 2 quick technical fouls, Sabonis will make a great substitution. In the 2022-2023 season, he was averaging 19 points, a league-leading 12.3 rebounds, and 7 assists on a remarkably efficient 61.5% from the field. Once again, he's yet another Kings player who's an excellent passer and playmaker, so the ball movement certainly won't suffer when he's on the court. Now on to the 3 rotation players. The first is their reliable point guard, Mike Bibby. In this franchise's time in the city of Sacramento, they've never been closer to winning the championship than they were when this guy was the floor general. He didn't have many flashy highlights, but Bibby was a smart decision maker, a solid perimeter shooter, and a player with a tremendous clutch gene. He'll really have a hard time finding minutes behind Oscar, Archibald, and Fox. But assuming he is able to make it onto the court, the offense will be in good hands. The second rotation spot goes to the 6'6" small forward, Jack Twyman. He's an NBA Hall of Famer and a 6-time All-Star, who was one of the best scorers in the league throughout the 50s and 60s. At his best in 1960, he was averaging 31 points, 9 rebounds, and 3 assists on 42% shooting. The last rotation spot goes to Twyman's teammate and friend, Maurice Stokes. This 6'7" power forward was not playing in the NBA very long before his life-altering head injury. But with that being said, in those 3 seasons, he was a 3-time All-Star and made 3 All-NBA teams. In only his rookie season, he led the NBA in rebounding with 16.3 per game. Simply put, he was an athlete with strength and athleticism that was way ahead of his time. And if it wasn't for the injuries, many believe that he would have been a rival to Bill Russell. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Kings team. Honestly, this franchise surprised me quite a bit. They've been in existence since the early years of the NBA, which certainly helps when it comes to acquiring talent. It's a pretty well-balanced team, but the things that stand out to me the most is their plethora of elite scorers and their insane ball movement. With so many elite passers on this squad, it will be like the 2002 Kings on steroids, and would certainly be fun to watch. Do you think this team would have a chance at making the ultimate playoffs in the West? Let me know below. Also, here's my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Starting at the point guard position is the 6'4" Hall of Famer Walt Frazier. In a franchise loaded with incredible point guards, Frazier is without question the best of the best. He was an NBA All-Star for 7 straight seasons with the team, and thanks to his solid scoring and facilitating, he was able to help the Knicks win 2 championships. In those 7 All-Star seasons, he averaged 21 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals on 49% shooting, which was especially impressive for a point guard in that era. What often isn't appreciated enough about this legend is the fact that he was one of the greatest two-way guards of all time, as he made a remarkable total of 7 All-Defense teams. Starting at the shooting guard spot is another legend from years past, Earl the Pearl Monroe. This 6'3" All-Star wasn't ever the fastest player on the court, but he was very crafty at getting to the rim and would regularly make difficult baskets in heavy traffic. He had a high offensive IQ, and with his pre-existing chemistry with Frazier, this duo will be an absolute problem for opposing defenses on the perimeter. Starting a small forward is one of the 75 greatest players in NBA history, Carmelo Anthony. I would argue that Melo's personal best was actually in Denver, but regardless, he was still an elite player in his time in New York. In the 2012 to 2013 season, he led the NBA in scoring, averaging nearly 29 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 assists on 45% shooting from the field. He was also hitting 38% of his three-point attempts that season. With Melo starting at the 3, he'll provide this squad with some solid floor spacing and with some clutch shot making to close out games. Starting at power forward is the 1970 MVP Willis Reed. This 6'10" big man is beloved and respected within the city of New York, as he's famous for pushing through an injury to help his team win the championship. He spent his entire career in New York and made 7 All-Star appearances while being an All-Defensive player in 1970. In his 7 All-Star years, he put up numbers of 20 points and 14 rebounds on 48% shooting from the field. Although he usually spent most of his time at the center spot, he did also spend some significant time at the 4, and he'll do well in that position for this squad, as he could run the floor and he was a solid mid-range jump shooter. The starting center is arguably the greatest player in Knicks history, Patrick Ewing. This 7-foot big man was an absolute force on both ends of the court, and at his best in 1990, he had a jaw-dropping average of 29 points, 11 rebounds, and a whopping 4 blocks, on a tremendous 55% shooting from the field. He was an 11-time All-Star who was regularly leading his team to be contenders in the Eastern Conference. Although he could play bully ball in the paint, he was also known for his very soft touch on his mid-range jumper, and this team will greatly benefit from both of those skills. Now on to the second unit. The backup point guard is the 6'5" star Michael Ray Richardson. He was a remarkably fast combo guard who could finish at the rim, but who could also make flashy passes for his teammates. He wasted no time having an impact in New York, and in just his second season in the league, he was already a monster statistically, as he led the NBA in assists and steals in the same season, while averaging 15 points and 7 rebounds. He was a 3-time All-Star in New York, and he won 3 steals titles, which helped him secure his 2 All-Defense Team selections. Honestly, Walt Frazier better watch his back, because Sugar Ray Richardson was definitely good enough to eat into his minutes. The backup shooting guard is the 1990 sniper Allen Houston. He was a 2-time All-Star in New York, and you could never give this 6'6" wing any space, or he would penalize you for it. At his best, he was averaging north of 20 points per game while hitting better than 40% of his 3-point attempts. He'll definitely be a player mixed in with several different rotations to take advantage of his floor spacing abilities. The backup small forward is one of the most explosive players in Knicks history, Bernard King. I honestly went back and forth whether I should start Melo or Bernard King. And ultimately, I went with Melo for the simple fact that he was a better 3-point shooter, and the rest of the starting unit desperately needed that help. This 6'7" beast was a strong force in transition, who played the game with a driven and angry attitude. He also had elite footwork and a solid mid-range jumper. At his best in 1985, he averaged 33 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists, on a stellar 53% shooting from the field. The backup power forward is yet another Hall of Famer, Dave DeBusschere. Back in the early to mid-70s, this 6'6" legend did a little bit of everything for the Knicks. For a power forward in that era, he was a tremendous perimeter shooter who absolutely loved to run the pick and pop. He was a consistent double-double player as he made 5 straight All-Star teams, but where he truly shined was his elite smothering defense, as he made a total of 6 All-Defense teams throughout his career. The backup center is the 6'9" legend Bob McAdoo. As a somewhat undersized center, McAdoo relied heavily upon the finesse style of his game. He was incredibly skilled and intelligent offensively. He didn't spend a tremendous amount of time in New York, but truthfully, he didn't have to in order to have a huge impact. For example, in the 1978 season, he averaged 26 points, 13 rebounds, and 4 assists on 52% shooting. Now onto the 3 rotation players. The first is a guy who helped his Knicks get to the NBA Finals in 1999, Latrell Sprewell. This 6'5" wing was a solid 2-way player who could be the best player on the court either offensively or defensively on any given night. In the past, he has had chemistry issues with his teammates and with his coaches, but his talent is worth a spot, even if he occasionally chokes out his coach. The second rotation player is the power forward / center, Amari Stoudemire. Having a player this talented being reduced to simply a rotation player does seem a little bit crazy, but the Knicks are absurdly stacked when it comes to big men, so it kinda is what it is. Although he was at his best in Phoenix, he was still a monster in his first season in New York, as he averaged 25 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 blocks on 50% shooting from the field. The third rotation spot, and the final spot on this roster, goes to the star shooting guard of playoff experience on the roster. Do you think this squad is a top 4 seed in the Ultimate East? Let me know your opinion. Also, here is my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. Starting at the point guard position is the face of Showtime, Magic Johnson. To many, and probably to most people, Magic is viewed as the greatest point guard of all time. One thing about this 6'9" floor general is that he really liked to push the tempo. The Showtime Lakers offense was ridiculously fast, and during his prime, he had guys who were solid at running in transition alongside of him. But especially on this Ultimate squad, they'll be even better on the fast break. Magic's best individual season was probably in 1987, while he was named the league MVP while averaging 24 points, 12 assists, and 6 rebounds on 52% shooting from the field. At the end of the day, there was basically no doubt on who was getting this starting nod. Starting at the shooting guard spot is the one known as the Black Mamba, Kobe Bryant. What's interesting is that Kobe never really played with a top-tier point guard in Los Angeles. Sure, Steve Nash was there for a bit, but that was long after Nash's prime. With Magic running the floor, Kobe will have to learn to play off ball, which will make this more like his time on the Olympic squads than anything else. Kobe ensures that this ultimate team will have a late game closer, a consistent flow of offense, and an elite perimeter defender. At his best in the 05-06 season, the Mamba averaged a ridiculous 35 points while being first team all-defense. To this day, that is the highest scoring average while being first team all-defense. Starting at small forward is the still active legend LeBron James. Throughout the vast majority of his career in Los Angeles, LeBron has started at the point guard spot. But in this case, he'll have to make room for Magic and return to his more traditional position. This should be no issue for LeBron though, as he's one of the greatest transition players that the game has ever seen. Magic used to be dishing the ball to a streaking James Worthy at the small forward spot, and as effective as that was, a streaking LeBron will be even scarier. At his Los Angeles best in 2020, James averaged 25 points, 10 assists, and 8 rebounds on 49% shooting from the field. With Magic and LeBron on the floor simultaneously, there will never be a time where the open man goes unnoticed. Starting at power forward is the former all-time leading scorer Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He's always played at the center position, so starting the 7-2 captain at the 4 may seem crazy to some, but I actually think it makes perfect sense when you think about the way this team operates. For one, Kareem was especially great at running the floor with Magic, especially when he was younger in the early 80s. Also, Kareem's bread and butter is not to score from directly under the basket, but it's actually from the post, as he had the most indefensible shot of all time, the sky hook. At 7-2 with that shot, opposing power forwards will be begging for mercy. In 1981, Kareem put up 26 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 blocks on 57% shooting from the field. Starting at the center position is the Diesel Shaquille O'Neal. In LA is where Shaq was at his absolute peak form, as he had the perfect combination of power and athleticism. With Kareem in the post and with Kobe and LeBron on the wings, Shaq will experience the most single-man coverage that he's ever had in his life, and due to this, he'll almost certainly be shooting a career-high percentage in the paint. Quite frankly, that point about single-man coverage is probably applicable to every player in this starting unit, and not just Shaq. During his nearly unanimous MVP run in 2000, Shaq averaged roughly 30 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks on a league-leading 57% shooting from the field. When you look at this starting unit of Magic, Kobe, LeBron, Kareem, and Shaq, some modern basketball fans might complain about the lack of elite three-point shooting. But honestly, I'm not sure how much that really matters if the starting unit is shooting 60% from 2-point range basically every night. Now on to the second unit, which is definitely strong enough to beat most starting units. The backup point guard is the logo himself, Jerry West. Many people debate whether West should be considered as a 1 or a 2. But given the fact that he was the starting point guard during their dominant 1972 championship run, that's where I'm placing him. Although the three-point shot did not exist yet in the NBA during his career, West was a guy who certainly could have been lethal from that distance. Not only is he known as Mr. Clutch for his big game performances, but he was also one of the most underrated defenders of all time. In 1972, he averaged about 26 points, a league-leading 9.7 assists, and 4 rebounds on 48% shooting from the field. The backup shooting guard is the 6'1" Hall of Famer Gail Goodrich. Without question, he's one of the most underappreciated players in the franchise's history, as he was a legitimate superstar in his own right. yet almost never gets any shine in this modern day. He was a solid pull-up shooter and was often the recipient of Jerry West's numerous assists. In their 1972 championship run, he averaged 26 points, 4 assists, and 4 rebounds on an elite 49% shooting. He may be battling for minutes with all of these incredible guards, but he'll never be a bad option when he's on the court. The backup small forward is the dominant Elgin Baylor. To this day, he holds the NBA record for the most points scored in a finals game with a total of 61, which basically sums up just how explosive he was offensively. Beyond that, he was the greatest rebounder ever for a player his size, as he intelligently used his strength and IQ to be among the league leaders on a yearly basis. In the 1961 season, Baylor put up an insane average of roughly 35 points, 20 rebounds, and 5 assists on 43% shooting from the field. He'll be right at home when he's on the court with West, as they earn the nicknames Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside. The backup power forward is the versatile two-way threat Anthony Davis. As a superstar off the bench, AD will be able to stay healthy more often, and will even be able to focus more of his energy on the defensive end of the floor. With the incredible traditional centers on this squad, he'll have even less attention on him when he looks to go to work from the post. His LA best was in 2020, where he put up 26 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 blocks on 50% shooting from the field. The backup center is arguably the most dominant player in the history of the game, Wilt Chamberlain. Maybe the biggest concern for this team will be morale and chemistry, because imagine trying to convince an elite Wilt Chamberlain to come off the bench. Regardless, that will be his responsibility on this ultimate squad. By the time he was in Los Angeles, Wilt had taken a step back as a scorer, yet he was still a terrifying rim protector and an elite passer from the post and in outlet situations. In 1969, he averaged 20 points, a league-leading 21 rebounds, and 4 assists on 58% shooting from the field. I can only imagine the mismatches that Wilt will be taking advantage of as he faces backup centers on a nightly basis. Now on to the 3 rotation players. The first is the man known as Big Game James, James Worthy. This 6'9" small forward had one of the quickest first steps in basketball history, and as I mentioned before, he was extremely dangerous in transition. You would be wrong to assume that he was simply a role player, as Worthy was a legitimate star who could take over on his own. Case in point, he was the 1988 Finals MVP with one of the greatest Game 7 performances of all time. During his 7 straight All-Star seasons in LA, he averaged about 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists on 53% shooting from the field. The second rotation player is another Hall of Famer, Pau Gasol. This 7-foot center / power forward helped Kobe Bryant win back-to-back championships in 2009 and 2010. He did it with his finesse-style offense and with his unselfish team play. In 2010, Pau put up 18 points, 11 rebounds, and 3 assists on 54% shooting from the field. He's yet another player on this absurdly stacked roster that will struggle to get a tremendous amount of minutes, but when he's in, he'll be a safe bet to produce. The third rotation player and the last spot on this roster goes to the role-playing shooting guard Michael Cooper. There is certainly more talented and more accomplished players who could have taken this spot, but with these last few bench spots, I'm looking for guys who can fill needed roles. There is enough superstar power on this roster, and what's needed is some 3-point shooting and defense. This 6'7" wing just happens to be one of the greatest 3-and-D players of all time. He made an insane 8 all-defense teams in Los Angeles, and for a while, he was a 3-point record holder in the NBA Finals. He was also insanely athletic, and was with all 5 championship teams in the 80s, proving that he has the playoff experience to belong. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Lakers team. Simply put, there is no weaknesses on this squad, as they are absurdly overpowered. The different rotations and lineups that could dominate are pretty much endless. When we eventually do the 2K simulation of all the teams, this team will likely be the favorite heading in. They'll probably still find a way to lose in the first round just because 2K is ridiculous like that. But in a more realistic scenario, it's hard to envision this team ever being stopped. My one major frustration with this roster is the fact that George Mikan isn't on it. But I honestly don't see what impact he could have had when there's so many great bigs ahead of him, which is why I ultimately went with Cooper for the final spot. Here is my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead, Starting at the point guard position is the electrifying Penny Hardaway. This 6'7" star was a strong combo guard who could dominate opposing teams with his tremendous scoring or with his quality facilitating. For a while in Orlando, him and Shaq were seen as one of the most formidable duos in the entire league. Not only did Penny have a size advantage over most point guards, but he also had a solid handle of the basketball and proved himself to be a dangerous perimeter threat in clutch situations. At his best in 1995, he averaged about 21 points, 7 assists, and 4 rebounds on 51% shooting from the field. Starting at shooting guard is the incredible 6'8" wing, Tracy McGrady. Not only was he an all-star every season he was in Orlando, but T-Mac was legitimately in the conversation for being the best player in the league. He led the league in scoring twice, getting as high as 32 points per game in 2003. For years, he was carrying the offense on a bad Magic team. But on this ultimate squad, he'll have plenty of open looks, as he'll finally have the superstar support to draw some of the defensive attention away. Starting at small forward is the 6'8" all-star Grant Hill. His prime was definitely in Detroit, and when he went to Orlando, many people assumed the Magic were going to get the same level of excellence. Well, unfortunately, Hill's time in Orlando was riddled with injuries, but he did manage to squeeze in one healthy all-star season, where he averaged about 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists on 51% shooting from the field. Due to the injuries, much of his previous explosiveness was gone, but he was still a fundamentally sound player who was very effective in the mid-range game. Starting at power forward is the 6'10" all-star Rashard Lewis. As a legitimate stretch 4, Lewis had a skill set that was way ahead of his time, and with his ability to stretch the floor, he'll be an incredibly valuable asset to this starting 5 that is in desperate need of his quality perimeter shooting. At his best in 2009, he put up roughly 18 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists on 44% shooting and nearly 40% from three-point range. Starting at center is one of the greatest big men to ever do it, Shaquille O'Neal. In Orlando, this 7'1" superstar was at his peak athletically, as he was in slimmer shape and was faster, quicker, and could leap higher as a result. He was a statistical monster in 1994 as he averaged 29 points, 13 rebounds, and 3 blocks, on a league-leading 60% shooting from the field. Now on to the second unit. The backup point guard is the 6'1" floor general, Scott Skiles. This facilitator is actually the NBA record holder for the most assists in a single game, as he got a total of 30 against the Denver Nuggets in 1990. He was a fast-paced player who was often the giver on many of Shaq's highlight slams. In 1991, he averaged 17 points, 8 assists, and 3 rebounds on tremendous efficiency splits. The backup shooting guard is the 6'6" wing, Nick Anderson. He was an athletic high flyer who helped his Magic make it to the NBA Finals in 1995. His individual best came in 1993, as he averaged 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists while hitting 45% of his shots. With his energy and skill set, he'll be a tremendous spark off the bench for this ultimate squad. The backup small forward is the versatile 6'10" weapon, Hedo Turkoglu. In the late 2000s, he was the perfect complementary piece alongside of Dwight Howard. as he was a dangerous spot-up three-point shooter. Specifically, in 2008, he was second on the entire team in scoring, trailing only Howard, as he chipped in with nearly 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists on 46% shooting and 40% from three-point distance. The backup power forward is the 6'10 champion Horace Grant. His best was certainly with Chicago, but without a doubt, he was still very effective in Orlando. In his first season with the team, he was averaging a near double-double while hitting a stellar 57% of his shots. When a more traditional approach is needed at the 4 spot, he'll make a solid substitution for Rashard Lewis, as Grant has pre-existing chemistry with Shaq and Penny from the 90s. The backup center is the athletic beast, Dwight Howard. He was never the dominant 30 points per game scorer that Shaq was, which is why the Diesel got the starting nod from me. But he was a guy who would regularly get 20 points and 20 rebounds on the same night, and was considered as the top center in the league for several seasons. Along with that, Howard was a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year winner, as he would often swat shots into the third row. Now on to the 3 rotation players. The first is the all-star point guard Jameer Nelson. He was an excellent floor general and a smart decision maker, as he averaged very few turnovers throughout his NBA career. During his peak, he was a tremendous shooter from three-point range, which will be yet another area where he can be massively impactful in his reserve role. The second rotation player is the 6'8 wing, Dennis Scott. Continuing with the theme of this roster, Scott is yet another dangerous perimeter shooter, as he was consistently among the league leaders in three-point percentage and three-point attempts. In 1996, he averaged 17 points, 4 rebounds, and 3 assists on 44% shooting and a lethal 42.5% from deep. The third rotation spot and the last spot on this roster goes to the 6'10 center Nikola Vucevic. Obviously, Shaquille O'Neal and Dwight Howard will get the vast majority of the minutes, but whenever Nikola is called upon, he'll do an excellent job of holding down the position, as he was an elite big in his own right. In 2019, he averaged a whopping 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists on 52% shooting from the field. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Magic team. Although this may not be the deepest and the most stacked team in the series, I actually really like how this roster filled out, as there is a plethora of snipers to surround Shaquille O'Neal and Dwight Howard, and that inside-out playstyle has really been successful for both centers in the past. Do you think this Magic team will make the ultimate playoffs in the Eastern Conference? Let me know your opinion. Also, here's my list of honorable mentions, should any of these players have made the roster instead. Starting at point guard is the modern leader of the franchise, Luka Doncic. This 6'7 star does a little bit of everything for his team, as he's already asserted himself as an all-time great scorer and as one of the greatest triple-double machines in NBA history. He'll be an awesome dual threat with this all-time squad, as he can score and facilitate with the best of them. Just last season, he averaged about 32, 8, and 8, proving himself to be one of the most productive players in Mavericks history. Starting at shooting guard is the all-time great ball handler, Kyrie Irving. Some might be a little annoyed by this pick, considering how little time Irving has spent with Dallas so far. But with that being said, there's no question that he's the most talented player for this role. In his 20 games with Dallas last season, he averaged 27 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds on 51% shooting from the field. With him and Luka on the perimeter, this team will basically never be struggling to produce points at a fast rate. Starting at small forward is the 6'6 wing, Mark Aguirre. He was a smooth and methodical player who made 3 All-Star teams in his time as a Maverick. He was not only an elite scoring mid-range player, but he was also dangerously efficient. At his best in 1984, he averaged 29.5 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists on a stellar 52.4% from the field. As a player who likes to go to work from the post, he'll give this team a reliable option in half-court sets. Starting at power forward is the NBA champion Dirk Nowitzki. This 7-foot sniper was basically unstoppable in his prime. With his tremendous length and with his iconic fadeaway, all you could basically do as the defender is pray that he missed it. Dirk was also the model of efficiency for the stretch 4, and in 2007, he became one of the few players to finish the regular season with 50-40-90 percentages. With Luka, Kyrie, Aguirre, and Dirk in the starting lineup, defenders would be foolish to risk double-teaming anyone. Starting at center is the former Defensive Player of the Year winner, Tyson Chandler. With this 7-footer at center, he'll ensure that the starting unit will have at least one elite defensive player to make a difference. With his rebounding and rim protection, Chandler was a major contributor towards their championship run in 2011. Luka will make a great lob connection partner for Tyson, as both players were especially great at reading defenses in that aspect. Now on to the second unit. The backup point guard is the efficient floor general Steve Nash. He's most famous for his MVP era in Phoenix, but even in Dallas, Nash was still a major contributor for his team. He was an up-tempo player who could make incredible passes in transition. With his court vision and with his elite three-point shooting, he'll make sure that defenses can never relax when he's substituted in. At his Dallas best in 2002, he put up averages of 18 points, 8 assists, and 3 rebounds, while having insane efficiency splits, including a whopping 45.5% from three-point range. The backup shooting guard is the 6'6" athlete Rolando Blackman. He was a 4-time All-Star in his time in Dallas, and he was an extremely reliable second scoring option, as he usually averaged around 20 points per game while shooting nearly 50% from the field over the course of his career. The backup small forward is the 6'7" wing Michael Finley. For years alongside of Dirk Nowitzki, he was a fantastic scorer and perimeter shooter. In 2000 and 2001, he was an NBA All-Star in back-to-back seasons, and over that time, he averaged about 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists on 46% shooting from the field. As he comes off of the bench, he'll continue the theme of the roster so far with his solid perimeter scoring. The backup power forward is the 6'7" weapon Jay Vincent. He was one of those guys who actually peaked in his rookie season, as he had a tremendous debut in 1982, where he averaged 21 points and 7 assists while hitting nearly 50% of his shots. He'll make an interesting substitution for Dirk, considering how he plays offense with an opposite approach, as he prefers a more grit and grind style near the basket. The backup center is the 7'6" tower Sean Bradley. Usually, he's on the embarrassing end of the highlight reel, as Bradley was dunked on many times by incredible wings. With that being said, he was actually a pretty quality player and a solid rim protector. For example, in 1998, he averaged 11 points and 8 rebounds while blocking 3.3 shots per game, which was third in the league that season, trailing only Marcus Camby and Dikembe Mutombo. Now on to the 3 rotation players. The first is another amazing floor general, Jason Kidd. He was past his prime in Dallas, but even then, he was still an all-star level facilitator, and in 2010, he averaged 10 points and 9 assists on 42% shooting. He was also the starting point guard during their championship run in 2011. He'll struggle to get many minutes behind Luka and Nash, but with these 3 in the rotation, there will never be a time when the position is lacking. The second rotation player is the all-time great three-point shooter, Jason Terry. He was monumental in their championship run in 2011, and as a high IQ player off the bench, he'll be a tremendous spark offensively. In 2009, he was actually second in the team in scoring, behind only Dirk Nowitzki, as he put up nearly 20 points on a nightly basis. The third rotation player and the final spot on this roster is the 6'4" combo guard, Derek Harper. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, this guy was the Swiss Army knife of the Maverick squad, as he was a massive contributor in many aspects. In 1991, he averaged about 20 points and 7 assists on 47% shooting. He also made 2 all-defense teams, which will be extremely valuable to this squad, especially on the perimeter. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Mavericks team. This roster will have a very unique style of play. This may just be the most jump shooting Ultimate team of the entire series so far, but it's also worth mentioning that outside of the centers, Derek Harper and Jason Kidd, this squad may just be the greatest example of the term, if you live by the 3, you die by the 3. Do you think this Mavericks team will make the ultimate playoffs in the Western Conference? Let me know your opinion. Also, here's my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? The starting point guard is the all-time great Jason Kidd. Simply put, he's one of the greatest passers in basketball history, as his ability to facilitate was why the Nets made it to the NBA Finals twice in the 2000s. Beyond that, Kidd was also an elite defensive point guard, as he made a remarkable 9 all-defense teams in his NBA career. He led the league in assists per game 4 times, including the 03 season, where he averaged 19 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds, and 2 steals. With the incredible superstars in this starting lineup, Kidd will be providing plenty of highlight connections. The starting shooting guard is half-man, half-amazing Vince Carter. Obviously, he's known most for his time in Toronto, but Carter was still an elite player in New Jersey, especially in his first year with the team. In 2005, with the Nets, Carter averaged 27 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists on 46% shooting and a lethal 42.5% from three-point range. With his tremendously deep bag, he'll be a threat in transition, in the mid-range, and on the perimeter. Starting at small forward is none other than Dr. J, Julius Erving. In his 3 years with the New York Knicks, Erving led the ABA in scoring twice, getting as high as 29.3 points per game in 1976. He was also a dominant rebounder and shot blocker in his youth, putting up some insane stat lines. He was simply one of the most athletically gifted players in NBA history. Just imagine a young Jason Kidd, Vince Carter, and Julius Erving running the fast break. And what you have is a recipe for a nightmare for opposing defenses. Starting at power forward is the 7-foot assassin Kevin Durant. KD will operate as a mid-range and 3-point specialist, and with the amount of space created by his star teammates, along with his all-time great point guard, he'll have plenty of wide-open looks from deep. In 2022, KD averaged about 30 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists, while having incredible efficiency splits. Starting at center is the 7-1 All-Star Brook Lopez. What the younger viewers need to understand is that Brook Lopez with the Nets was nowhere close to being the same player that he is today. In New Jersey and Brooklyn, Lopez was not a face-up 3-point shooter, but rather he was a more traditional center who went to work with his back to the basket. For a while in the early 2010s, he was genuinely in the conversation with Dwight Howard for the title of the best center in the game. Between 2010 and 2017, he averaged about 20 points and 7 rebounds on 50% shooting from the field. Now on to the second unit. The backup point guard is the elite dual threat Deron Williams. You can argue that his best was his time in Utah, but without question, he was still a threat in his first couple of seasons with the Nets. In 2012, he averaged 21 points, 9 assists, and 3 rebounds on 41% shooting from the field. If a floor general with a more scoring mindset is ever what's needed, then Williams will make a solid sub for Kidd. The backup shooting guard is the 1990 sharpshooter Dražen Petrović. As a skilled European player with tremendous range, he was way ahead of his time. He's often described by his peers from that era as one of the greatest shooters in NBA history. It makes sense considering how he averaged as high as 22 points per game in New Jersey, while shooting 52% from the field and 45% from three-point range. Due to his tragic and abrupt passing in a car accident, we never got the chance to see the very best of Petrović. But regardless, what we did see was pretty darn good as well. The backup small forward is the ABA superstar Rick Barry. Having this man come off the bench seems pretty wrong, but that just goes to show how strong the starting unit is. Barry was ahead of his time as he was a dominant scorer with a deadly pull-up jumper. In 1972 with the New York Nets, he averaged 31 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists on 46% shooting. Coming off the bench, he'll be an all-time great spark plug, tearing up opposing defenders of the second unit. The backup power forward is the dynamic athlete Kenyon Martin. This 6'9" high flyer was one of the most reoccurring recipients off of Jason Kidd's playmaking, and he was actually an all-star in 2004 as he averaged roughly 17 points, 9 rebounds, and 1.3 blocks on 49% shooting from the field. In the instances where Kevin Durant will need a rest, Martin will provide a much meaner and more traditional approach. The backup center is the 6'10" beast Derek Holtman. Technically, he played more of his career at the 4 spot than at the 5, but he'll fit in well at the center for this second unit. He was an all-star in 1994, and that year he put up a stat line of 20 points, 11 rebounds, and 2 blocks on 45% shooting. Now on to the 3 rotation players. The first player is the 6'7" small forward Bernard King. He only spent his first couple of seasons in New Jersey, but regardless, he had an immediate impact and produced one of the strongest rookie seasons in NBA history, as he averaged 24 points, 9 rebounds, and 1.5 steals on 48% shooting. With his power and determination in transition, along with his skill in his mid-range game, he'll be a sure thing off the bench. The second rotation player is the 6'7" star Richard Jefferson. He was a fantastic above-the-rim athlete who was quite the teammate to Jason Kidd in the mid-2000s. As a reliable slasher in 2006, he averaged nearly 20 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists while hitting 49% of his shots. With his energy and athleticism, he'll be a terrific sub to take the momentum. The third rotation spot, and the final spot on this roster, goes to the do-it-all combo guard Michael Ray Richardson. With New Jersey in 1985, he was an NBA All-Star, and he was a tremendous performer on both ends of the court. That season, he averaged 20 points, 8 assists, and a league-leading 3 steals on 47% shooting. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Nets team. I must say, this team has no shortage of offensive weapons, and they will be a handful on the fast break with plenty of highlight slams on a nightly basis. If there's one area where they're relatively weak, it's probably in the paint. But with their terrific playmaking, with their elite shooting, and with their elite slashing, many nights they won't need to win the battle of the points in the paint. Do you think this Nets team will make the ultimate playoffs in the Eastern Conference? Let me know your opinion. Also, here's my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the roster instead? Starting at point guard is the 6'4" champion Jamal Murray. He's just now reaching his late 20s, but regardless, he's already established himself as one of the best perimeter players in franchise history, and is certainly worth the starting spot as the floor general. In the regular season, Murray is a solid and reliable option, but over his last 2 trips to the playoffs, he's made himself known as one of the most clutch players in the entire league, as he takes his production to another level entirely while having insane efficiency splits. With him at the helm, there's no question that this squad will be getting a big game performer when the matches matter the most. Starting as shooting guard is the 6'4" high flyer David Thompson. They used to call him Skywalker, and for obvious reasons, as he was one of the most tremendous leapers that the game has ever seen. He was so much more than just that though. Thompson was incredibly skilled and had pristine fundamentals. His offensive game was so polished that even the great Michael Jordan modeled much of his game after him. Unfortunately, his career was cut very short due to drugs and injuries, but at his very best, he was among the top scorers in the entire league. In the 1977-78 season, he averaged 27 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists on a stellar 52% shooting, and that season included a 73-point performance where he made 20 out of his first 21 shots. He'll be a lethal perimeter assassin for this all-time group. Starting at small forward is the 6'8" scoring champion Alex English. I'm sure most of you have heard this stat by now, but in the duration of the 1980s decade, no player scored more total points than this guy, Alex English. He was a smooth and methodical player who did the vast majority of his damage in the mid-range. On top of his craftiness, he was a lengthy player, with an extremely high release point on his jump shot, which made him darn near impossible to block. At his best in 1986, he averaged about 30 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists on better than 50% shooting from the field. Starting at power forward is the all-time great post player Carmelo Anthony. I know, he spent basically all of his time in Denver playing at the 3. But unless I moved him out of his traditional position, I was gonna have to send either a prime David Thompson, Alex English, or Carmelo Anthony to the bench, and I wasn't willing to do that. So the 4 spot it is. As a 6'7" post scorer who had more strength and weight than most players at his height, Melo can certainly hold his own in the post as a power forward, but he can also stretch the floor with his solid 3-point shooting. He'll also be a deadly go-to option in fourth quarters, as he was one of the most clutch shot makers during his peak. In the 06-07 season, he put up averages of 29 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists, while making roughly 48% of his shots. The starting center is the greatest player in franchise history, Nikola Jokic. It's already scary enough to have this many weapons in the starting lineup, but then you consider how Jokic will be making plays for those fellow weapons, and it will be a nightmare for opposing defenses. Unless you never pay attention to modern basketball, you know what you're getting from the Joker: an MVP candidate, a triple-double machine, an efficient shooter from everywhere on the court, and one of the greatest passers in basketball history regardless of position. In the 22-23 season, he put up some of the most broken numbers we've ever seen, as he darn near averaged a triple-double while hitting a mind-blowing 63% of his shots. Now onto the second unit. The backup point guard is the one they call Mr. Big Shot, Chauncey Billups. As a former Finals MVP winner, this man took over the floor general duties and helped transform Denver into a legitimate title contender in 2009. Not only was he a perennial all-star, but he was also an NBA all-defender. He had an extremely high offensive IQ, which kept his turnovers per game average extremely low. He was also one of the best three-point shooters and best free throw shooters in the league. Coming in as the point for the second unit, he'll ensure that the second group runs like a veteran, well-oiled machine. The backup shooting guard is the answer, Allen Iverson. Of course, his best years were in Philadelphia, where he was an MVP winner. But with that being said, I think people forget how good he still was in Denver. For one, he enjoyed some of the most efficient seasons of his career in Denver, which was thanks to the fact that he finally had some solid offensive support to help draw the defensive attention. And he'll have an even greater supporting cast on this all-time team. In the 07-08 season, he averaged 26 points, 7 assists, and 2 steals on 46% shooting from the field. He'll basically guarantee that the second unit will never struggle.
you.